Chapter 746. The 300-kilogram mixture of steel and flesh floated in the air for approximately 20 seconds before naturally turning around and landing on the top deck of the yacht. The top deck wasn't that big to begin with, but it was divided into the sunlight area and the driving area. The latter was very difficult to accommodate an exoskeleton armor, so Luo Nan naturally chose to land in the sunlight area. This squeezed Yin Li's space and gave her quite a bit of pressure. Yin Li didn't retreat. She trusted Luo Nan's control skills, so she needed to display this sense of trust. When the exoskeleton armor finally came to a stop, the protruding blades of the side arms were only a few dozen centimeters away from Yin Li's face. The powerful electromagnetic field, the mutual interference forces of the mental and the material blended together. The sound of electric currents from the driving machinery and the fine grinding sounds of metal components formed a reverberation, pushing the surrounding air molecules to oscillate back and forth. It made her body feel numb as if she had been electrocuted. This was the truth. What followed was a wave of heat. The outermost layer of flesh and fascia of the exoskeleton armor was finally unable to withstand the repeated pressure of various forces. It was as if it had encountered a high temperature. It was scorched black, curled, and finally burned into ashes. Yin Lu had seen this sort of situation countless times over the past few days. She was already used to it. She didn't even blink. She stood quietly to the side, watching the components of the exoskeleton armor fall off Luo Nan's body one by one. They gradually returned to being neatly arranged components and were sealed into the metal box formed by the armor's outer shell. The lid of the box closed, but Luo Nan's body still hadn't truly touched the ground. The tips of his feet were suspended in the air, giving off a feeling of weightlessness. Instead, he bore the weight of an incorporeal and powerful force. He rejected the air, the night, and even all external objects, forming a domain of his own that didn't rely on external forces. Even though his floating weight had been reduced by over 200 kilograms, this method of purely relying on his body to resist Earth's gravity shook Yin Li's mind even more than the previous scene of wearing armor. This was truly not relying on external objects. His fleshly body floated in the air. This was an extraordinary power that humans had always yearned for in their dreams since ancient times. Even though they had entered the era of distortion, this sort of ability was still rare. It was also the most eye-catching. Especially since Luo Nan didn't use any shortcuts or methods. Instead, he used his control of electromagnetic power to probe into the fundamental plane of the world. He used the most upright methods to form this legendary scene. Of course, Yin Lu was envious in her heart. She had also tried flying before, but it was through an out-of-body state. She couldn't understand the similarities and differences between the two, but it must be a wonderful experience. She didn't need to conceal her emotions. She just stood beside Luo Nan's floating body and let out a soft sigh of admiration. Truly inconceivable strength. If I start learning electromagnetic configuration from now on, will I have the chance to replicate your ability in the future, sir? Of course, this is the most basic requirement. Luo Nan let out a long breath. The tips of his feet finally touched the deck, and the powerful electromagnetic field around him gradually subsided. With your relationship with the Blood Soul Temple, you already possess the basic strength of mental interference with matter. As long as I can grasp the basic electromagnetism configuration and learn some transformation techniques, I will definitely be able to fly in the air for a short period of time. As for combat applications, I am currently learning them. Clearly, someone had chosen the wrong frame of reference. Yin Li didn't continue this topic. As a secretary, mentioning herself was actually a way to highlight the brilliance of the boss. It would be too stupid to declare that she wanted to become like the boss, even if she couldn't help but yearn for it. She changed the topic to Luo Nan's practice schedule. Today ended a bit early. Sir, do you have any other plans? Or do you want to rest early? There's news from Xia City. It's a good time for me to change my mind. News? The coordinates of Grandpa's laboratory are up for auction. Luo Nan was too lazy to form a sentence. He just said a few key words. He sat directly on a bench in the sunlit area and relaxed his body. There's finally some news from that side. I think they'll send me an invitation in the near future. Yin Lu was even more cautious when dealing with such a sensitive topic. Have you already confirmed the auction house? Yes, the Toyama auction house. It's over at Bin City. Bin City? Yin Lu nearly said, what a coincidence. But when she saw Luo Nan's unexpectedly relaxed expression, as well as Luo Nan's increasingly deep eyes, she swallowed back her words. She thought for a bit and said, the Toyama auction house has quite a lot of activities in the inner world. After all, the surroundings of the archipelago are rich in mutant species. A lot of special materials are auctioned there. I remember that their spring auction is about to begin. If it's in Bin City? It might not be in Bin City. Luonan faintly smiled. If we play a little bit and add some promotional activities, wouldn't we be able to pull more people onto the ship? Onto the ship. Enlu subconsciously swept a glance at the yacht beneath her feet. She didn't understand Luonan's joke. Mister, if you want to raise funds? Luonan directly interrupted her. Why would I need to spend money on my grandfather's things? I just want to see who in the world is the one paying for the sound. Enlu was unable to grasp Luonan's emotions and thoughts. She could only say the most correct words, I'll listen to Mister's instructions and everything. Luonan nodded slightly and raised his eyelids. He saw that the lights were still on in the work area. Let alone the words on it, the graphics were very familiar. Report to Mrs. Halder? Yes. Mrs. Halder is very concerned about Mister's situation. Enlu absolutely wouldn't call Mrs. Halder boss, at a time like this. However, Luonan wasn't able to understand her meticulous thoughts. Luonan didn't have any clear interest in Enli's manuscript. He raised his head and rested in the sunlit area, adjusting the state of his body and mind. Oh, the moonlight was shining down right now. Enlu was certain that Luonan didn't care about the matter of the report, but she still didn't close the work area. She just gently walked to Luonan's side, bent her legs and knelt on the bench with one knee. She massaged Luonan's shoulders to loosen his muscles. For work like massaging shoulders and massaging back, the most suitable position was naturally at the back. However, the top deck was an inch of gold. The position Luonan chose just so happened to be at the edge of the water. There really wasn't any suitable space at the back, so Enlu could only use this awkward position. However, this made them appear more intimate, so Luonan didn't refuse. Luonan closed his eyes and enjoyed it for a moment, allowing his body, which was suffering from the penetrating effects of the electromagnetic field, to relax a bit. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze didn't immediately focus. Instead, he was dazed for 2 seconds before he focused on the most eye-catching virtual work area on the top deck. In the end, his gaze focused on the psychic diagram embedded within the words. This diagram was the work he was most proud of for some time. The most wonderful thing about it wasn't the information revealed, but the core logic that formed this diagram. Luonan had told Enlu that there were multiple angles of reference and interpretation, but deep down in his heart, he always believed that the only person who could truly understand this psychic diagram was perhaps himself. This was because this was an intuitive diagram constructed upon the foundation of the developer mode of the mental world. It was also the first time Luonan didn't avoid a true enemy. He risked the danger of suffering a backlash from psychic communication to carry out a surveying and mapping survey. Luonan's initial clairvoyance on the mental plane was vastly different from the results he saw from other ability users. He didn't see the structure of 3 layers, 1 region, and 1 domain from the very beginning. Instead, he saw a deep multi-layered structure of curtains. Countless curtains fluttered and fluttered within the deep void. They were all independent, layer upon layer, and there was no end to them. However, under the influence of rules and power, several strands would occasionally twist and converge, forming either stable or loose nodes. The vast majority of them were only temporarily adhered together, quickly dispersing on their own. But there were also some that, once twisted together, formed into a dead knot. Brand new rules and laws were solidified, making it hard to separate. Basically, Luonan viewed the movements displayed by these curtains as the reflection of extraordinary power on this special plane. Every node that was twisted by the curtains was the result of the extraordinary power of an ability user. It was just like when people explored the abyssal region. Some people were powerful enough to leave behind permanent or semi-permanent solidified configurations in the abyssal region. Some people couldn't even persist for a few milliseconds. Of course, the developer mode of the mental world and the abyssal region couldn't be equated. The former was more like the bottom layer of an operating system. The layers involved were deeper and broader. It was more like the intuitive embodiment of some system rules. Luonan viewed this judgment very cautiously, but he would occasionally float. He gave himself the grand title of a man who gazed directly at the truth of the world. This was the first time that Luonan's version of the truth of the world was consciously replicated and placed into the psychic diagram. It was precisely because of the display of the information in developer mode that this psychic map showed 3 gigantic sea tornado elements that stood between the sea and the sky. These were 3 powerful extraordinary level enemies that could directly influence the future. The first was naturally Gong Chi of the cloud world. The second was also very clear. It was Luo Yuan who grasped the dimensional crossbow. As for the third, Luo Nan didn't have a definite target. Instead, he played creatively. He set the target to be the person who drew up the treat plan and the power he represented. He didn't know if the other party was an extraordinary or not, but for a character like Luo Yuan to tacitly cooperate with him, his influence could be imagined. Whether it was in terms of ability or power, it was never wrong to look up to someone. These three powers formed the basic structure of the psychic diagram. But from the perspective of composition, the three sea tornadoes clearly occupied too much space, destroying the balance of the composition. This also hinted at the conflict between Luo Nan, the true creator, and the actual composition elements. Only after understanding all of this could Luo Nan look at the other elements. The enormous ship that was washed to the top of the waves was a key element that had continued from the beginning of this event. There was nothing much to say about it. What was truly interesting was the throbbing lightning formed by the contrast of light and dark between the layers of clouds, the waves, and the pillars of air. They embodied the tension of the storm in the painting. If one were to analyze it in depth, it would represent some sort of conflict, but it would also represent some sort of connection. Especially between the two pillars of air of Gongqi and Luo Yuan, the lightning trajectories interweaved particularly tightly. Chapter 747. Luo Nan held a relatively cautious attitude toward the results of psychic communication with extraordinaries. In the past few months, Luo Nan, Mr. Bai, Gao Tianshi, and even Old Yu had discussed psychic techniques. The three seniors had pointed out very seriously that psychic techniques could provide foresight, but it was very likely that one would suffer a backlash. Whether it was in the legends of ancient times or on the plane of reality, psychics who forcefully peered into the secrets of heaven through psychic and divination techniques could basically write a book on the number of psychics who died from a backlash. This was especially true in the current era, where extraordinary powers were manifested. The levels and realms were clearly differentiated. Even though the ruler had its advantages and the CUN had its disadvantages, true experts had their internal logic and external environment integrated into one. They were natural sources of radiation. If one forcefully peeped into them, one would have to be prepared to die from the radiation. And it was very normal for the results of psychic communication to be distorted and interfered with when facing such targets. There were cases of people vomiting 3 liters of blood and receiving the wrong answer. There were even cases of people dying from anger. Whether it was Gongqi or Luo Yuan, they were the strongest people in the world. No matter how low-key they were, the influence of their radiation covered the entire world. Especially Gongqi. He was a powerful figure in the ability user society. His influence was even more astonishing. It was no surprise that he and Luo Yuan had intersected or that there was some unclear relationship of interest between them. Therefore, Luo Nan wouldn't come to a conclusion easily. The results of psychic communication needed to be verified. Plus, he wasn't directly probing the two dangerous targets. When using the psychic diagram, Luo Nan had intentionally overstepped the iron law of avoiding extraordinaries when using the psychic technique. He had taken the initiative to touch the domain of extraordinaries. But he did his utmost to avoid meeting force with force. He tried to use more skillful methods. He made more thorough preparations. He chose a more suitable and ingenious angle. He also found the most comfortable and smoothest starting position. Snake Tongue and Fan Lu. Neither of these two were extraordinaries, but one was Gongqi's spirit behind his back. The other was Luo Yuan's driver. They formed a close and direct connection with the two extraordinaries, but it was also a blind spot in a certain sense. It looked like a trick, but it was actually the optimal solution obtained by combining all kinds of intelligence and information. Right now, Luo Nan had 2 different methods of dealing with Snake Tongue and Fan Lu. He used a method of close contact with Snake Tongue. However, he didn't have any hope that she could keep this secret. All he wanted was a channel of information that could influence Gongqi's judgment. However, the current situation was so smooth that he was a little surprised. Let's leave it at that for now. As for Fan Lu, Luo Yuan's chauffeur, he was a perfect entry point. He had been following Luo Yuan for more than 10 years and was definitely a trusted aide. Even if his aptitude was mediocre and he was unwilling to undergo genetic modification, his status was neither high nor low. However, his understanding of Luo Yuan was far greater than anyone else's. Luo Nan dug up a lot of interesting information from Luo Nan's dream, and this was under circumstances where Luo Nan had clearly taken some mental defensive measures. Moreover, although Luo Nan used the psychic diagram as an effective method of gathering and analyzing intelligence, he wouldn't wholeheartedly rely on this method to conquer the world. Once the psychic map had a clear direction and center of gravity, the entire world's mental sensing network would be put to good use. Luo Yuan's senses were far too sharp. Luonan couldn't follow him all the time to avoid attracting attention. But Luonan didn't need to worry about anything here on Fan Road. Luonan temporarily set aside his cultivation. Aside from the news related to the auction, he also received more concrete feedback on the actual scene. Right now it was early morning in Ban City. Inland, whose city was roughly 2 time zones away. Right now it was midnight. Fan Lu, the target he was paying attention to, had already been waiting quietly at Hu City's airport for 3 hours. Finally, the transport plane from the wilderness had arrived. Fan Lu was involved in a large transaction, and it was a crucial link in the treat plan. Fan Lu personally handled all the procedures of receiving, inspecting, transferring, and so on. From the moment the transport plane arrived, Fan Lu and his attendant, Little Zhao, didn't have a moment of leisure. Separate the equipment and data. Are the appraisers from the Toyama auction house here yet? The transfer vehicle is waiting over there. Our people don't get involved. Let the people from the Toyama auction house handle it. This matter has nothing to do with us from the moment the equipment leaves the transport plane. Everything was busy but not messy. While the appraisers from Toyama were nervously inspecting the equipment and data, Fan Lu had already finished his work. He let out a long sigh and even had the leisure to lament, "I haven't seen these familiar old objects in 20 years. Speaking of which, I actually didn't notice them at all when they were placed in that place." Little Zhao went, but before he could respond he was rudely pushed to the side. Fan Lu turned his head in horror, but he saw a fellow with a deformed head suddenly jump out. The fellow's long and narrow eyes stared straight at him. "Contact the next transport plane for me. I'll go with it." What? Fan Lu didn't understand for a moment. He was even more baffled as to why this fellow, the Horned Demon, suddenly followed him. Speaking of which, although the transaction with the Toyama auction house was done under the name of the Horned Demon, it actually had nothing to do with him. The airport wouldn't even notify him of the transfer, but this fellow, the Horned Demon, gave a rare explanation. "I suddenly had some inspiration in that laboratory. I want to go there to verify it. I'll take the next transport plane there." Fan Lu felt his scalp hurt. It's not like you haven't been to that place before. It is not big and now half of it has collapsed. If such a big transport plane goes there, it will definitely be empty. How can there be another one? Then arrange one for me. Hiss, you know the environment over there, right? I don't need to emphasize how unstable it is. This transport plane is originally rushing for time. They are waiting at the last moment. Now even if I arrange one for you, there is a high probability that it will be transferred again. You won't be able to find the entrance even if you go there. Why bother? You idiot, why do you care about me? I was the one who found the entrance. Fan Lu's good intentions were trampled into the mud by the Horned Demon. No matter how good-tempered he was, he couldn't help but explode. "You found it? Ha, as early as 20 years ago we were there. I was also the one who found it 20 years later. Hee, that place has always been under Wu Jun's control. You snatched it? That was also found by me." Fan Lu finally realized that he had nothing to say to a madman, so he could only use the delaying tactic. "I have to inform Mr. Luo Yuan first." As Fan Lu said, he turned around to leave, but his neck was clasped by the fingers of the Horned Demon when his body only turned halfway, and he was forcibly pulled back. As the force penetrated, the blood vessels, nerves and bones in his throat were squeezed and twisted. His vision turned black and he almost fainted. "What are you doing?" Xiao Zhao was shocked. He wanted to come over to save him, but he was kicked by the Horned Demon and flew 10 steps away. He fainted directly. This time, the appraisal and transfer work on the transport plane was suddenly interrupted. Several appraisers from the Toyama auction house not far away were stunned. The security personnel they brought raised the firearms in their hands and aimed at the Horned Demon who had already lifted the person halfway. The atmosphere was so tense that it could collapse at any time. Damn. Fan Lu knew that the Horned Demon was a dog. He would turn his face at any time, but he didn't expect the most ruthless bite to bite him directly. His vision turned with difficulty, trying to save himself. The security of the Toyama auction house couldn't be counted on, but at this time he was on the transport plane. Some of the passengers here were the products of the gene exchange. Damn it, with his current state, unless Luo Yuan's attention was on him, there was no chance at all. The Horned Demon completely ignored the outside environment and the changes in the atmosphere. He only put his deformed and distorted face in front of Fan Lu. "Don't you understand? I found it and I should have special rights there." Fan Lu's brain was already hypoxic. He slapped the Horned Demon's arm hard, but the latter just talked to himself. These days I have a lot of inspiration, especially when I am dreaming. I can feel some kind of wonderful guidance from those flying fragments. They may combine into the most wonderful answer at any time. Do you understand that feeling? Oh, I forgot that you can't speak. The horned demon finally let go, and Fan Lu fell directly to the ground. His whole body was soft and he only knew how to cough and retch. The horned demon didn't mind squatting beside him and patted his shoulder and back. I know you are very busy doing odd jobs. It is very difficult for you to understand this kind of mysterious state, so you don't need to waste any more effort. I make a request and you just need to agree. Everyone can relax. Fan Lu repeatedly chopped the horned demon 100 times, 1,000 times in his heart, but he still had to act nice on the outside. He made his final persuasion with a hoarse voice. You can wait a little longer. In a month, no, in half a month you will have a lot of time to research. With that baby who is still drinking milk? I'm saying that you don't need to try your luck and find the door. The horned demon's finger pressed onto Fan Lu's neck. I say, little Fan. Even though we have been kindred spirits quite a few times, you still don't understand. Luck is my attribute. You don't need to worry about such a boring thing. Give me a definite answer. Do you agree or not? Fan Lu coughed a few more times. He wanted to speak again, but his head had already been forcefully snapped down by the horned demon's monstrous strength. He nodded twice. The horned demon's voice came over. Excellent. Happy cooperation. Thousands of kilometers away, Luo Nan began to chuckle. Yin Lu, who was right next to him, massaging his shoulders, felt strange. She leaned back slightly. Mister? The soft sensation on Luo Nan's shoulders and even the side of his cheeks left. His mind instantly became empty, but it was soon filled with more important matters. You said that you had spare materials for the transmission array you built last time. Yes. Chapter 748. The medium-sized transport plane flew through the night, advancing all the way inland, but in the end, it still couldn't outrun the sun that rose from the horizon. The transport plane that flew all the way from Huqing finally arrived at the relevant airspace when the first light of dawn silently spread over thousands of miles of wasteland. From beginning to end, the cabin of the transport plane was empty. Everyone was in the cockpit. Of course, there were only 3 people on the entire plane: the pilot, co-pilot, and the centaur. As a bad customer who forced his way onto the plane, the centaur was self-aware and clearly showed his distrust of the 2 crew members. He was nailed in the cockpit until the transport plane arrived at the destination he hoped for. What was strange was that the cabin was empty along the way and the cockpit was quiet. The centaur, who always had the talkative attribute, actually kept his mouth shut. If one didn't look back, one wouldn't be able to feel his existence. If silence could be accumulated, the transport plane would have crashed halfway due to severe overload. After finally reaching the target airspace, the centaur finally said, "Descend." The transport plane penetrated the clouds and continued to descend. Looking out from the porthole, the slightly undulating red soil of the wasteland below was already the kind that the centaur was familiar with. He looked at the instrument panel on the transport plane and converted the angle of the sun. The centaur was finally satisfied and patted the shoulders of the 2 pilots. Very good, maintain this height. We will hover for a while. Pay attention to the mutants. It shouldn't be a problem for you. As the centaur said, at an altitude of about 6,000 to 7,000 meters, the population and number of flying mutants couldn't be underestimated. Hovering around was not a good choice. However, neither the pilot nor the co-pilot spoke. They just followed the centaur's instructions and began to hover at high altitude. They skillfully avoided several waves of flying mutants that passed by. This continued for about 20 minutes before the centaur finally stopped. Very good, very agile. The pilot and co-pilot remained silent. As the products of the gene exchange, they were the most capable subordinates and executors. The centaur's praise was completely wrong. Of course, the centaur didn't care. After saying that, he left the cockpit and walked into the rear cabin. At the same time, he gestured for the cabin door to be opened. I won't trouble you with the landing. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. See you next time. As the hatch opened, the cold and strong airflow from the high altitude went straight in. The centaur faced the whistling wind, closed his eyes, opened his arms, and jumped down without hesitation. Only his sharp whistle was left in the cabin. In the cockpit, a radar alarm sounded. The co-pilot could clearly see through the monitor screen that almost at the moment when the centaur jumped off the transport plane, a huge shadow swept past the bottom of the fuselage and converged with the centaur's figure, then it dived at high speed. The pilot and co-pilot looked at each other. Without saying anything, they flew the plane back. The centaur, who made a leap of faith from the transport plane, stood steadily on the back of a pterosaur. This high-altitude mutant, known for its ferocity, was uncomfortable with the sudden weight on its body, but it only slightly twisted its long neck and maintained a relatively stable posture. Then it spiraled down. After just 3 minutes, the centaur truly set foot on the sun-covered wasteland, and the pterosaur, which was a temporary vehicle, flew back into the sky and disappeared in a blink of an eye. Deterred by the huge size of this high-altitude predator, dust and smoke rose from all directions in the wilderness. Some of the small animals that were swimming around in the surroundings fled in all directions. Some of them lost their normal rhythm and quickly became the breakfast of the strong. The food chain of survival of the fittest was simple and straightforward. It didn't require any brains at all, and it was most favored by the centaur. He looked around and glanced at this wilderness full of wildness and vitality. Of course, it was full of cruelty. He grinned and stood there with his arms crossed, waiting quietly. In just a few minutes, the pterosaur just now returned. From its broad shoulders, 3 figures jumped down one after another. One of them just landed on the ground, and he took the opportunity to punch directly into the rippling red ground. Half of his arm was deeply stuck in the ground. He then raised his hand, and his fingers had already pierced between the head and neck of a giant viper that was as thick as a human thigh. Red and green body fluids mixed together, flowing on the snake that had been caught but was still twitching violently. Then the snake was thrown everywhere. Amidst the protests of the others, the snake catcher didn't say a word. He stuffed the fat viper together with his own arm into the long mouth of the pterosaur that landed next to him. The sharp teeth of the sharp-beaked pterodactyl habitually scraped the food, instantly turning the venomous snake into strips of meat. When the tip of the teeth scratched the snake catcher's arm, which was even thicker, it did not leave the slightest mark. After feeding, the snake catcher slapped the pterosaur's head, almost causing this top meat-eater that looked like the reincarnation of a dinosaur to fall down. So, the pterosaur soon flapped its wings and flew into the air again. In the blink of an eye, it flew high and disappeared. It felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from the completion of the mission, but it also felt as if it had fled far away. The snake catcher was undoubtedly the strongest among the group. The centaur probably only reached a position slightly below his chest. When the sharp-beaked Quetzalcoatlus was used as a vehicle, it probably put most of its strength on this person. It was only natural that it ate the food he fed. The centaur was quite afraid of this giant. It kept staring at him, and after confirming that the giant didn't say anything else after feeding, it turned its gaze to the other two. Apart from the giant, there was also a middle-aged man who was as thin as a monkey. As soon as he landed, he squatted by the side and fanned himself. His curled-up body felt like it was too small to fit on the giant's shoulder. His actions were extremely jumpy, which was really unworthy of his face that had been through the vicissitudes of life. He stuck out his tongue and shouted, "Hot, hot, hot." His face was red as if he had a heat stroke or taken drugs. The centaur was more familiar with this person, so he took the initiative to greet, "Monkey, how many did you drink today?" Monkey spat, 10 little blue balls. I was brought over by Fatty Dragon before I could get it. I can turn the earth upside down now." As he spoke, he glanced at the giant who created the shadow on the side, but he didn't continue. As for the last one, even in the wilderness, he was still wearing a suit as if he had just walked out of a business banquet. A bow tie, a watch, and a pair of shiny leather shoes. Everything about him made him look like a well-dressed person. At this time, the fastidious person looked down at his watch and frowned. "We are about 20 minutes later than the scheduled time. There's no time to chat now. Remember, we are here to receive the secret auction results. It has nothing to do with the centaur. That's why, you stubborn fatty dragon, you should have listened to me just now and released the germs separately. That way, everyone wouldn't have to trudge around on foot. You should know that every minute in the wilderness, the amount of viruses and germs we inhale is more than 200 times that of a big city. And this damn soil." With that said, the fastidious person turned around to leave, but before he could take a step, his shoulder was hooked by the centaur. The two men's faces were almost stuck together. The latter didn't care how disgusted the fastidious person looked and whispered in his ear, "I heard that your good friend Brain Demon died. It doesn't matter if he died, but where is Wu Jun or a family that can threaten me? This is your plan, right, flour sausage? Call Jingxin." Fastidious person, Jingxin pushed the centaur away in annoyance. He even used his fingers to wipe off the dust on his shoulder. "There are always accidents in everything. We have been trying our best to find her these few days. We even caught 2 of the upper echelons of the small parish for questioning, but Wu Jun seems to have disappeared. Then what about her child? Brain Demon did it personally, but I heard that he didn't even leave a complete corpse. This is an accident among accidents. We still don't know what kind of powerful enemy Centaur encountered. We can only determine from the traces of the Fusang tree that this is a very powerful psychic. Even after Brain Demon used the Fusang tree system to exert his strength, he still crushed him to death like a bug. Is very likely to be a transcendent. If it's a hidden trump card of the Shilua parish, it will definitely be a very terrifying matter. I don't care who killed the Brain Demon or how he died. I only care about where Wu Jun and her child that you promised me are. That child should have left the U-Hole market. You have to know that the surrounding environment is too complicated, so we haven't found him yet. Alright, don't be angry. I admit that the conditions I promised you were greatly discounted. The parish will make up for the difference. Jingxin revealed a perfect and sincere smile. You cannot trust me, but there's still Maho, Fatty Dragon, and the Amaterasu parish. After so many years we should have established mutual trust, right? Centaur stared at Jingxin without even blinking. Jingxin straightened his face and put on a more habitual serious expression. What the four of us need to do now is to squeeze out the value of that laboratory before the inexplicable treat plan is activated. This is a bet on the reputation of you, me, and the parish. We have also opened up a connection with the true upper echelons. The dark network auction went very smoothly. We just need to get the rest of the money now. Centaur chuckled. Now that the equipment and information have been dismantled and taken away, without Wu Jun, even if we can enter the door, there's no way to find the truly valuable things from those fragments. As long as she enters, it's victory. Centaur, my dear friend, you have to understand that Luo Yuandao's laboratory is just the entrance to a huge maze. I believe that in his years of research, there are indeed some techniques that can capture valuable fragments in the equipment he taught Wu Jun, but that is only a limited method to increase the probability. In essence, they are still trying their luck. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the power to protect themselves after 20 years. Jingxin was trying his best to brainwash Centaur with his glib tongue. Fat Dragon suddenly crossed his arms, signaling for the dangerous topic to stop for the time being. At the same time, he said in a deep voice. Chapter 749. 3,500 kilometers away from some inland wasteland, Ban City's time zone was pushed forward by 3 hours. When the first glimmer of dawn appeared over the wasteland, the sun was already high in the sky over Ban City. Today was Monday, the first working day after the weekend. Due to the barbell structure of the city, which was short from north to south and long from east to west, the many layers of traffic in the east and west of Ban City sunk into a busy and congested predicament. Temporary drainage channels were opened on North Mountain Lake. The military and police were mobilized on a large scale to suppress the mutant population on the lake, allowing for flying cars to shuttle through. The humming sound of engines resonated through the horizon. The tranquil and leisurely scenery of last night was nowhere to be seen. During this busy time, the 2 passengers on the yacht drifting on North Mountain Lake entered a working state. The sunlit area on the top deck was supposed to be a leisure area, but it had now become a temporary work area. Whether it was Luonan or Yinlu, they were both immersed in writing and data. They were extremely busy. Luonan had been writing and drawing from the moment he entered this state. His brush moved like it was flying. He sketched one character after another and handed them over to Yinlu for intelligence gathering and analysis. Actually, the technology of telepathic transcription had long since matured in this era. Luonan could completely use the relevant technology to reproduce the images of his mental clairvoyance into electronic information and search it directly. No matter how lifelike the sketches were, they were still separated by a layer. This kind of method affected Yinli's efficiency quite a bit. It made her do a lot of extra work. However, the secretary had to accept the willful choice of the boss. Yinli didn't have any thoughts of complaint in her heart. After all, this was a real-time image from several thousand kilometers away. Even though Yinli knew that Luonan possessed the ability to mentally travel 10,000 kilometers, it was still hard for her mind to not be shaken when she truly experienced it from a different angle. It was still the same saying. Omnipresent. It was practically omniscient. It was omnipotent. Plus, Yinlu knew that Luonan's sketching technique was related to his clairvoyance and analysis of his targets. It contained deeper details. Therefore, she didn't feel the slightest bit of pain. She just earnestly sorted out the images Luonan drew and organized them. At the same time, she mobilized the Blood Flame Order's accumulated database over the years to distinguish, analyze, and determine the nature of these characters. She promptly reported them. The one in the Jeep, Kevin? Gardner, a self-proclaimed ranger with a B-rank fleshly body. Aside from close combat, he was proficient in all sorts of military equipment, including all sorts of exoskeleton armors. It wouldn't be surprising if he could drive the Deep Blue Walker. We always suspected that he had a military background, but even when we were at our best with the military, we couldn't find any concrete evidence. The person controlling the glider to descend is nicknamed Hua Dian. He's a very famous spirit energy detective in the industry, and he can basically be confirmed to be a spirit medium. Usually he would only take money, but this time, his motive was quite suspicious. This barefoot ascetic priest should be Anthony. Although he did not appear in the mainstream circles of the inner plane, he had always taken it upon himself to spread the gospel. His prestige in the world of religions was high, and some parishes even hoped to confer him the title of saint, making him the main guardian saint of the extraordinary domain. It was said that he had been searching for the holy relic, hoping to find the traces of holiness in the changes of the new era. There are many believers of traditional religions who hold this belief and have even formed a secret organization. Anthony is likely to be one of them. Ian Lu felt more and more baffled after finding the information of the three participants. The backgrounds of these three people are quite complicated. Aren't the horned demons looking for trouble by asking them to come? They're not complicated and they can't. They don't have the guts to participate in the dark network auction of the horned demons. Luo Nan responded without thinking. His mental sensing network continued to capture the target and focus. He didn't just give the target a quick sketch during this process. Instead, he started from various angles, referring to the information Ian Lu provided, and even starting from the feeling of a split second. He sought to capture the fundamental characteristics of the target. Not only did this fill the living starry sky with material, but it also served as preparation for the future drawing of the psychic diagram. They weren't the only ones. Although they had different standpoints and positions, the horned demons were doing similar work 3,000 kilometers away. They relied on Fatty Dragon's special ability to control the surrounding mutants. This ability appeared to be quite common. Luo Nan had personally witnessed the deaths of 2 ability users of this type. Puppeteer had died to the Devil Ray's bite, and Brain Demon had died even more miserably. They were all like this. Even Luo Nan himself had this type of ability in a certain sense. However, Fatty Dragon, this big guy, appeared to be much calmer than the other 2 who had died. His consciousness seemed to be able to jump back and forth between multiple mutants at any time. It was a bit like when Luo Nan's soul was in an out-of-body state. Mr. Bai had once misinterpreted it as the attached soul state. He could switch back and forth quite freely, seeming to be able to jump back and forth within a radius of 100 kilometers. Even with the restriction of needing a life vessel, Fatty Dragon's monitoring range was the widest that Luo Nan had ever seen, aside from himself and a few other mental extraordinaries. Anyone would think that Fatty Dragon was of the fleshly side just by looking at his build, but his attainments in the mental side were quite deep. Luo Nan took the information provided by Ian Lu and sized it up seriously. Ian Lu explained in a soft voice to the side, providing some unclear details of the information. Fatty Dragon is the backbone of the Amaterasu Order. He is also one of the high-end thugs. He was mentally retarded in his early years, but the true god of the Amaterasu Order personally enlightened him and unlocked his innate talent. Since then he has been out of control. In a short 6 or 7 years, he has already stably occupied the top 200 of the various inner world rankings, and he is still rising. In terms of combat strength alone, some people call him the Eye of Truth Fairchild of the Order of Justice and the Secret Wheel of Life Master Fan of the Eye of Secret Contract. They are known as the 3 heroes of the Secret Order. And these 3 seem to be drifting away from the core decision-making circle for various reasons. In any case, Fatty Dragon's existence has clearly raised the level of this transaction. Luo Nan nodded. So this person needs to maintain a distance from the horned demon. Otherwise, the other participants will certainly have misgivings. Ian Lu also agreed with this judgment. She then said, as for the other 2, Monkey Horse was born in the wilderness. He is lecherous and bloodthirsty. He is a notorious savage among the vagabonds. He is also a frequent guest on the official wanted list. I don't know when he joined the Amaterasu Order. This time he probably needs to conceal his identity and give others a surprise attack. As for that Jingxin, it's quite strange for him to have a relationship with the Amaterasu Order. His official identity is a wilderness ecology expert at Hood's Wilderness Laboratory. At the same time, he is also a member of the Ability User Society. He also has a professional technical position at headquarters. I'm afraid that Abner's expression won't look too good when this news gets out. Abner was the president of the Ability Users Society headquarters. He was nominally the representative and leader of the entire world's ability users. Luo Nan had already seen him a few times from afar through the mental sensing network. He could more or less imagine what that person's expression would look like when he said that. He grinned and then furrowed his brows. The Amaterasu order has pulled out many hidden strings. They are completely determined to win this transaction. If they have this kind of determination, they can just take out the money to bid for the bid. They can also directly cooperate with the dark hand behind the scenes. With the horned demon in the middle, they should know each other's background. Yin Lu was unable to answer this question. Luo Nan didn't expect to obtain an answer. He quickly raised another question. How can anyone get involved in the Amaterasu order? Let's not talk about the horned demon. Fatty Dragon's background is simple, but Jingxin is a member of the society with a high position. Brain Demon and Horse Monkey are vagrants of the wilderness. The doctrine of education without discrimination, Tianqi True Soul, is just a random patchwork. There's nothing special about it. Snake Tongue's myriad spirit order can be modified and used without a single flaw. Luo Nan had more or less experienced the atmosphere of the Amaterasu order's headquarters these past few days in Ban City. The management was really quite loose. Large and small overground and underground orders were allowed to grow in Ban City, the core region of the order. For example, Zuo Wei, a mutant that clearly possessed basic intelligence and had already become the core of a small order, lived next to the residential area and allowed them to do as they pleased. It looked quite impressive, but in Spring City, they had to obtain the holy cloak of the Xia Luo order as soon as possible. They didn't even hesitate to dig up the foundation of the order. Luo Nan still wasn't clear on what kind of logic they followed. Because Luo Nan was racking his brains for the Amaterasu order, the members of the Amaterasu order fell into a rather headache-inducing situation as more and more people appeared to participate in the transaction. Aside from Anthony, Huadian, and Gardner, there were other people approaching from different directions and distances. With so many people, it was hard to avoid some bumping and bumping. *CKME. Black Mist. That bastard who likes to put curses on people. Back in the wilderness, that fellow tormented me until I peed my pants. The horse monkey was thick-skinned. He spoke of his family's embarrassing past like a fart, but the hatred in his words caused the vast, sunny wasteland to seem a bit gloomy. He appeared in a spiritual body state. Jingxin grasped the main point. This fellow is clearly overconfident. You must know that there are 10 people participating in the transaction, including us, right? The horned demon nodded in confirmation. Jingxin continued, most of the 10 people should be on the mental side. They are scheming against the unsuspecting. All of them have the ability to deal with him. It's all too easy for a monkey to take revenge. Jingxin consciously assumed the position of the brains of this four-man group. He pacified Horse Monkey and reminded his companions of a more critical issue. Pay attention to the motorcycle rider that's following Gardner. I can't see his face clearly right now, but I remember the dagger behind his waist. Cui Qinghe, a swordsman from Ji City. He's proficient in close combat assassination. However, he has another identity. He's an Ablatum Knight. Li Taixing, the Secret Covenant First Ablatum of the Order of Justice, came to Chan City to negotiate. This person was one of the attendants. Before the Horned Demon and the others could digest this, they heard another question. Who is this person? The one who spoke was Fatty Dragon. He rarely asked a question. At the same time, he used a secret technique to share the image he sensed with his companions. This backpacker. Is he part of the transaction? At nearly the same time, Luo Nan, who was over 3,000 kilometers away, locked onto the last person. The instant the focus was completed, Luo Nan's pen tip froze. Chapter 750. The constantly approaching traders made it necessary for Horned Demon and his group to disperse as soon as possible to avoid being caught plotting behind the scenes. Because of this, every problem had to be resolved in a race against time. Jingxin, who assumed the position of think tank, felt that the search efficiency of the order's database was terrible. 40 to 50 words popped out from the gaps of his teeth before the corresponding information appeared. Wan Ta, the director of the Orchid Town Welfare House in the Forest Wall district of Xia City. The founder of the Order of Creation. Currently, the Order has 27 members and 2 suspected ability users. What the hell? Fortunately, the follow-up information was somewhat valuable. He has a good relationship with Luo Nan. Xie Junping, an official member of the Order of Creation, is Luo Nan's best friend. They communicate frequently. Jingxin raised his head and cast a horrified look at Horned Demon. You actually let this kind of person participate in the auction and even let him pay a deposit. Are you sure that this Wan Dean one doesn't have Luo Nan, Ouyang Qin, Wu Jiong, or all of them behind him? Horned Demon was also horrified. Are you kidding me? I didn't allow the IP of Xia City to join at all. This Dean Welfare House must have used some sort of method. Horse Monkey had a big heart. He even comforted the two. Xia City isn't a monolithic block. The information that flows out from there every year is worth at least $1 billion. Who knows how many so-called insiders have gotten rich? Look, isn't Horned Demon the living proof? Horned Demon and Jingxin ignored him. Jingxin asked Fatty Dragon, are you sure there's no one hiding behind this guy? Fatty Dragon said in a muffled voice, he himself is very troublesome. He has already sensed the surveillance carrier. The gazes of the few people intersected before finally focusing on Horned Demon. Horned Demon was silent for about 3 seconds before he burst out laughing. If Luo Nan was called over ahead of time, many people would have very interesting expressions. But from my point of view, that kid would rather kill his way over than let an inexplicable person come over to scout the situation. Xia City has a lot of plastic brotherhood. Don't rush to a conclusion. The current situation is very complicated. It's much more complicated than we imagined. Jingxin went through the information of the participants again. The more he thought about it, the deeper the waters were. However, it was impossible to turn back now. Otherwise, evacuation would be a big problem. There's not enough time. Let's disperse first. Fatty Dragon set up the communication network. Everyone can contact each other at any time. First, do the work on the surface. Then we can sort out the rest step by step. This was the safest way and it was also the last resort. Other than the Centaur, the 3 members of the Amaterasu sect covered their tracks. With the support of Fatty Dragon's huge sensing range of nearly 100 kilometers, they staggered from the direction of the people coming from each direction. The Centaur stayed in the same place. He first pondered, then he squatted down and grabbed a handful of red soil from the ground. There was still the body fluid of the snake that was killed by Fat Dragon. He stuck out his tongue and used the tip of his tongue to roll up the mixture of soil and viper gravy. He tasted it carefully and swallowed it. An ominous fishy smell. Malice is approaching. The Centaur's mood became a little anxious. He stood up and walked around the hole made by the fist on the ground several times. As a psychic, he tried to pinpoint the source of the malice, but his spiritual compass seemed to have been blown away by a strong wind. It was inaccurate. For such a situation to occur, it was either that the other party's strength was far above his, or that there was more than one source of malicious intent, or both. Either way, it was far from what he had expected. The Centaur stretched out his hand, and the limbs in his vision were trembling slightly. We're all in place. We're turning back. Jingxin reported the latest situation on behalf of Fatty Dragon, who was not good with words. The light spots on the glider should be able to capture your position. Gardner, who is in front, will arrive in about 15 minutes. The black fog is also trying to sense from afar. Are you ready? The Centaur was still looking at his arm. After a few seconds he grinned. It doesn't feel good. However, when I think about how they have to search for the laboratory door from scratch, I feel a lot better. Jingxin ignored the crazy words that followed and voiced his opinion. I don't feel good either. Apart from us, half of the remaining 6 people had powerful backgrounds or were suspects. This looked more like the inspection of the goods before the auction. Before you exposed your information, the real seller would have already sold the entire process to the last detail. Centaur, my old friend, you might be dancing in the palm of someone else's hand. I hope you don't drag us into it. *CK. No matter what, it was impossible for the Centaur to back down now. Just as he was speaking, the people participating in the transaction were arriving one after another. He had already seen the dust stirred up by Gardner's off-road vehicle and the trajectory of the light spot's glider hovering in the air. In other directions that he could not see, layers of complex thoughts were surging up. Just as he predicted with his psychic connection, there was a serious lack of goodwill. About half an hour later, all the participants in the transaction had arrived at the location where the Centaur was. Different people, the same scrutiny, and the natural resistance and pressure in the unfamiliar environment and atmosphere of suspicion caused everyone to naturally distance themselves. They were scattered in an area with a diameter of nearly 100 meters, only surrounding the Centaur in the middle. The 3 people from the Amaterasu cult showed no flaws. They were scattered in different directions, intertwining with the other 6 people. Those who knew each other, like Jingxin and Cui Qinghe, nodded to each other. Those who hated each other, like Ma Hou, looked ferociously at the black mist as if he wanted to devour it. This was not a disguise but a performance of his true colors. But in the end, all the focus was on the centaur's head, which made the deformed skull in front of his forehead ache. The pressure was huge. But the more it was like this, the more excited the centaur became. In this state, the centaur's craziness was finally completely stimulated. Under his feet was the red earth wasteland covered with wrinkles, but it felt like he was standing on the glorious stage of an opera house. He didn't deliberately face anyone. Instead, he chose to turn his back to the sun, allowing the rising sun to gild his body. Then he began his speech. Everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you here. Logically speaking, I should have given a passionate speech, but based on the foundation of our relationship, there was basically no need for that. As I have written in advance in the instructions for the secret visit auction, this is a transaction of, one is willing to take the hit, and the other is willing to take the hit. In this transaction, I may be a shameless robber, but I may also be an idiot who buys the casket and returns the pearls. You may spend a huge sum of money to pay the deposit, but you may also find a treasure that will make people envious. At the end of the day, this is a transaction full of gambling. It is an exciting and unhealthy relationship. So, I must say the ugly words first. I must confirm again that you all already understand the background of this transaction. At this time, Gardner, who was wearing a leather coat and sitting on the hood of the off-road vehicle, raised his hand like a good student, indicating that he had something to say. The centaur gestured for him to speak. Gardner's skin was a weather-polished dark red, and he wore sunglasses. His whole body was dark under the sun, but when he grinned, his teeth were white and very eye-catching. And his words seemed to be even more attractive. The background you are talking about, are you referring to the lucky incident of being a flag-waving minion, but accidentally signing the final large auction commission agreement? As soon as he said that, sparse laughter came from all directions. Some were serious and some were not amused, and the people who laughed included Jingxin and Horse Monkey. What F*** King good acting skills. The centaur's cheeks twitched twice, and his eyes slid across Gardner's face like a venomous snake. The latter still maintained a bright smile, not caring at all. It was also at this moment that on the Amaterasu Parish's secret communication network, Jingxin once again announced that his judgment was correct. Look, this is basically an inspection team. Perhaps behind these people are the buyers who were prepared to pay in that damned auction. After mocking the centaur impudently, Horse Monkey locked onto his enemy again and chuckled, I don't know about the others, but that guy from Black Fog, unless he transforms into the world's top actor in his spirit body state, I dare to swear that this guy's gambling addiction must have flared up, and he just barged in. He doesn't know the twists and turns inside, so now he's stupid, and the frequency at which he detects others at the mental level has increased several times. Is this good news? Jingxin reluctantly responded out of friendship. Of course it's good news. I think he's now a little girl who's been stuffed into a men's prison. What a perfect test subject. We have to keep him, don't scare him away. The centaur didn't comment on this. He had his own thoughts and rhythm of speech. Therefore he could endure the ridicule around him and maintain a basic commercial face. It's good that everyone understands the background and has expectations. Can save me a lot of saliva. But according to the most basic professional ethics, no matter what kind of cognitive standpoint you have, I still have to emphasize the essence of this transaction. The opportunity one provide you is just to taste the so-called fresh flavor before the real carnival of capital. And your bid won't get real goods and services. What you get is only an opportunity, and it's an illusory opportunity. Maybe you're lucky enough to reach the sky in a single bound, maybe you're unlucky enough to have the corpses dealt with later. At this moment, someone spoke again, but his voice was a little strange. Because it was Black Fog who spoke. As the only participant who came with a spirit body, he was like his name, like a dark cloud that had sunk to the ground. At this moment he was using his mind to interfere with the material level, vibrating the air molecules to form a voice. You don't have to be so secretive. I just want to ask, as long as you pay the balance, can you enter Luo Yuandao's wilderness laboratory to explore and search? The information and items found inside can also be taken away at will? Before he finished speaking, Black Fog's heart sank. Because at this moment, more than a dozen gazes shifted over at the same time, and there was a subtle change. Black Fog was a senior B-level powerhouse after all, so he didn't lack experience in scheming. From his point of view, the changes in the gazes of the people around him, even if there were some differences in the details, were similar in essence. There was no need to be precise. Just working together itself was tantamount to excluding him, and it also confirmed the guess in his heart. He had stumbled into a deadly vortex. Mata was annoyed. It was also his fault for getting carried away by the recent abnormally popular formatting theory, cage theory, and configuration theory. When he heard that it was the possible origin of these theories, he excitedly paid the deposit, thinking that it was a gamble to cut the queue, but he forgot to refer to similar incidents, which were all earth-shattering. This was not a place for a small investor like him to mix in, not to mention he had encountered a troublesome old enemy like Maho. Bad luck. Bad luck. Bad luck. Black Fog already had the intention to retreat. At this moment, the Horned Demon also responded lazily, "I've said it before, it's just an opportunity. In fact, your luck wasn't too good at the beginning. There was a small problem with the extra benefits I prepared for you, so I had to cancel it. This also caused us to have to put in more effort to enter and exit Luo Yuandao's laboratory." Black Fog couldn't go around with the Horned Demon anymore, but he couldn't step too deep either. He could only act appropriately and pretend to be anxious, speak human language, whereas Luo Yuandao's laboratory. The Horned Demon's expression didn't change. "It's right where I'm standing, within a radius of 300 kilometers. Black Fog didn't even need to pretend. His spirit body was greatly shaken, and the sound wave formed by interference was like a loudspeaker buzzing. "You tricked us. With a radius of 300 kilometers, this is the area of a large metropolitan area. You want to play hide and seek here until the end of time? I've said it before, one is willing to take the hit and the other is willing to take the hit. Damn it, you're going to scare this coward away." Maho scratched his ears and cheeks as he watched from the side. He couldn't help but forcefully correct the Horned Demon's words through the internal communication network. Jingxin persuaded Maho to maintain restraint. "Black Fog has long wanted to run. It's useless to be tactful. Besides, it doesn't matter if he runs away. You can chase him back. If you feel that your strength isn't enough, I think Fat Dragon will be happy to help without affecting the mission. He has always had an appetite for this kind of spirit body." Fat Dragon didn't respond. As for the Horned Demon, he seemed to be looking back. He raised 3 fingers and made an oath. "I can swear with the spiritual perception of a psychic that Luo Yuandao's laboratory is indeed in this area. However, it is affected by a special force and drifts erratically. However, it is definitely traceable. Otherwise, it would be impossible for it to go to the auction. I will inform you of this news and join the search team. If it is found, I will share it with everyone for free." Having said that, he chuckled again. "Actually, after finding it, it can't be hidden. At present, the laboratory's anchoring device has been dismantled and transported. If you want to open the gap, the collision of spacetime and the interaction between the mental and material levels will be very spectacular. You should be worried that the Toyama auction house will come back for trouble instead of wasting precious time and doubting my information." The Horned Demon's solemn vow still showed a certain degree of persuasiveness. However, no matter what he said, Black Fog would never stay here. At this moment, the Horned Demon's pointed words also came over. "Anyone can leave at any time, no problem. However, as stated in the event description, the balance is not collected and the deposit is not refunded." Diagonally opposite, the psionic detective Hua Dian, who had been silent since he arrived, also raised his hand, indicating that he had a question to consult. F*CK the deposit, F*CK the F*CK opportunity. Black Fog directly retreated, and the Horned Demon answered the question. This was the best opportunity to leave. Didn't Maho, that son of a bitch, stared at him with venomous eyes? His decision was obviously correct. Just as he retreated, Maho's figure in the distance jumped as if he was about to chase, but he forcefully stopped with an unwilling expression. Such a reaction made Black Fog's heart turn cold. This son of a bitch has an accomplice. Otherwise, with that temper, how could he hold back his fierceness? Without time to rejoice, Black Fog used the advantage of the spirit body's high-speed flight and retreated with all his strength. In a short time he escaped hundreds of kilometers away. This should be a safe distance. Among that group of people, there were no extraordinaires who could spread the sensor network over hundreds of kilometers. Black Fog relaxed a little when he didn't see the enemy chasing him. He temporarily slowed down and diverted his attention to plan his next move. At this moment, a shockwave suddenly cut through the void. It was so strong and sharp that even his mind was in turmoil, giving him a fright. An expert had crossed the border. The shockwave came and left abruptly. Although it was strong, it left no traces. However, there was a penetrating and sharp intent that went straight to the depths of his spirit body. This wasn't an illusion. Black fog seemed to be hit by a strong beam of light in an instant. The light shone through the bottom structure of his spirit body, and he felt that there was almost no privacy. Such an impact, if it landed, would definitely be a first-class spiritual killing method. Even in the out-of-body state, black fog evoked a hair-raising memory of his physical body. His spirit body froze in the air for almost a minute. After confirming that he was not injured, he finally knew how to think. Which deity had arrived? Looking at the direction, he should be going to the horned demon's side. Forget it, it's just a passing, it has nothing to do with me. Black fog was sure that today was the day of his great misfortune. Everything was inappropriate. He couldn't stay any longer, so he suppressed all distracting thoughts, calmed his mind, and fled far away without looking back. After black fog fled for another 10 kilometers, a raven commonly seen in the wilderness arrived late. It arrived above the area where black fog had been stunned for a long time. It circled several times but found nothing. Fuck, he ran away. After Monkey got the news, he didn't have the mood to hide anymore. In front of everyone, he stomped his feet heavily. However, no one paid attention to him. Most people were communicating with the horned demon about the details of this transaction, preparing for the so-called gambling on luck later. Monkey wanted to vent again, but Fat Dragon suddenly updated his message. Seems to be still there. Ha! Fat Dragon rarely spoke with uncertain words and tone, so Monkey didn't dare to easily interpret it. He cautiously confirmed, "Who is still there?" Chapter 751. What an inexplicable fellow. 3,000 kilometers away at Beishan Lake in Ban City, Luo Nan rapped on the table, issuing a ridiculing evaluation. Yin Lu, who was combing through the information, raised her head. Which one? Is that black mist? It's a perfectly fine soul body, but it's turned into billowing smoke. Sir, the soul body of our order of black mist is actually... That's the inevitable result of the interference between soul strength and the body. But this fellow is purely using a smokescreen. He's deliberately mystifying. He's got nothing better to do. Luo Nan slapped the table. He wouldn't tell Yin Lu that he was vexed because he needed to expend extra brain power to imitate this meaningless appearance. It was also because of this emotion that he could not stand the Black Fog's methods in other aspects. So he had to refute it. Luo Nan hastily drew a simple diagram in the work area. He grabbed the key link and fiercely criticized it. In essence, the soul-body state of the black mist was a disturbance wave that continuously radiated outwards, causing the order of the surrounding mental and material structures to go out of harmony. Therefore it was chaotic and disorderly. There were no rules to speak of. The more it was like this, the more the core of the soul-body needed to maintain a balance. The black mist adopted a method of chaos on the outside but tranquility on the inside. There were two layers, the surface layer and the inside layer. The surface layer could toss about freely, while the inside layer was calm and tranquil. The advantage of this was that it was relatively stable. It wouldn't turn into a lunatic from the backlash of the chaotic disturbance waves. But the chaotic and disharmonious fluctuations flowed on the surface. The intensity of the interference between the mental and material planes couldn't rise. The information says that the black mist is proficient in curses. It's not good at attacking fortifications. This is the problem it was born with. This fellow really should study the knowledge of configuration in depth. He also needs to improve his courage and insight. What's the point of compromise and balance? Put more effort into the domain of reological configuration. It seems chaotic but it's stable. It seems moving but it's static. Realize a kind of dynamic balance like a storm vortex. Won't its power increase instantly? This way it's easier to form a resonance with the storm of the abyss region. You're using the wrong frame of reference again. Inla didn't dare to say the words of ridicule in her mind. She didn't quite understand why Luo Nan wouldn't let go of the black mist, but she didn't have the obligation to plead leniency for this complete stranger. Luo Nan's criticism didn't affect him from doing proper business. Right now he was comparing the structure of the black mist's soul body. He imitated the disharmonious disturbance wave state vividly. As for whether the inner layer would choose static or dynamic, there was no need to think too much. He would definitely strive for perfection. In any case, the people outside all felt the same. Well, without the corresponding dye, the color of the black fog is a little lighter. I hope it won't be seen through soon. Soon, the black fog spirit body reappeared on the wasteland, and the simulation was 70% to 80% similar. Of course, this imitation was an interference creation of the soul cloak, a tool, that could be remotely controlled. It was still fundamentally different from an out-of-body spirit. The work was a little rough, but the timing wasn't bad. Just as the imitation was completed, the raven that acted as a surveillance carrier flapped its wings and flew past. Luonan originally didn't want to be in such a rush. He had already sent Yin Lu to purchase raw materials. He was prepared to make Rue Wen go through the trouble of setting up a transmission array in this wasteland and teleporting her fleshly body once more. This way he could lock onto the coordinates of his grandfather's laboratory and conduct solid research and exploration. However, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. The centaur actually married 2 people. After selling the official coordinates to the Toyama auction house, he squeezed out the remaining value from it and fooled a group of people to come over. Luonan certainly couldn't just sit and watch. It was a coincidence that he chose to enter as the Black Fog. He also had some helplessness. Coincidentally, this black fog was more suitable for him to temporarily impersonate. He didn't need to go through the link of the transmission array. He was helpless because of Dean Wantawan sudden appearance. Luonan still didn't understand why Wantawan would meddle in this matter. However, he was fully aware that this staunch materialist sensitivity towards the changes in the material world was simply outrageous. The condensation ring as the foundation of the soul cloak had an effect on the water molecules in the surrounding environment. Others couldn't sense it, but it had already attracted Dean Wan's attention, just like Luo Yuan did a few days ago. Luonan still wanted to cover up a bit before clarifying Dean Wan's position. The necessary and unnecessary disguise was completed, but Luonan was a bit vexed for a time. What should he do next? The standard answer was to find the entrance to his grandfather's laboratory, to explore and protect it. However, the current situation was that Luonan had started searching long before he could analyze and impersonate the Black Fog. Luonan had already done several rounds of investigations while the centaur was spouting nonsense. Presumably, none of the participants were like him. Their perception could easily cover a radius of 300 kilometers. However, the preliminary investigations didn't yield any results. Luonan was worried that the centaur was talking irresponsibly. The radius of 300 kilometers was just an imaginary number. He expanded it by another 200 kilometers. Within 1,000,000 square kilometers, from the stratosphere to nearly 100 meters underground, Luonan had practically searched the entire area. However, he still didn't find any traces of a laboratory door. Actually, this was the source of Luonan's vexed mood. The centaur's speech and explanation were nearing the end. Right now, he was using Cui Qinghe's question to make a conclusion about Luo Yuandao's wilderness laboratory. I believe that this laboratory is very likely to be a half-plane. I don't need a noun to explain something like this. It's more or less similar to the deep blue world or the Pacific Ocean right now. Of course, the scale can't be compared at all. You can view it as a cave, but there's no mountain base. There's only some sort of space-time depression or remnant. The centaur created his own noun without any burden. He cackled, I can't say more about the specifics. When we get there, we'll see if we understand. If we don't understand, then we don't understand. I just want to emphasize once more. Even if we get lucky and find the entrance to the laboratory, we lack the anchoring equipment. The door is unstable and the space is unstable. We can be ejected at any time. We can also disappear or die. I won't be responsible for the consequences that occur. What are you blindly blabbering about? If we keep messing around, that fellow Black Mist will really run away. Horse Monkey was really impatient. He chattered endlessly on the internal communications network to vent his frustration. Since he didn't run away before, he definitely won't leave now. On the internal communications network, Jingxin once again cooled down the agitated Horse Monkey. Right now, the crux of the matter lies in the fact that the laboratory door, which should have been easy to enter, has been buried in the hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of wasteland. We need to seize the time to dig out that door and stuff all these people in. That's the right thing to do. These people? You said it yourself. Each and every one of them is here to inspect the goods. Can we really get rid of them? Even if it's the previous plan, there's no need to get rid of all of them. Besides, that fellow Black Mist, you said that he's a perfect experimental subject. It's rare to have such a good target. If he's ruined by you, why don't you report this to the Pope and the true deity? Horse Monkey fell silent. But at this moment, Horned Demon, who was supposed to be giving a generous speech, seized an opportunity to interrupt the discussion. I've heard of that fellow Black Mist. He's a super coward. He wasn't lying when he said that he was leaving. Now that he has run 100 kilometers away, he has stopped. Perhaps he has discovered something new? Horse Monkey and Jingxin's eyes lit up. Horned Demon split his attention as he discussed in secret while wrapping up his speech. He clapped his hands and said, "Time is precious. It's time to test everyone's luck. I'll also reveal some information to everyone. It can be considered an advertisement. The Toyama Auction House's spring auction is on the 13th of next month. It's said that it will be held in some high seas. Therefore, in theory, the maximum time limit for our search and research is about half a month. Yes, it's hard to say if Toyama will intervene midway to preserve its value. It's fine as long as everyone has a plan." During this time, Jingxin asked Fat Dragon about the situation of the Black Mist, to which the latter simply replied, "I don't know. No matter what, it's a clue. Don't make it too obvious. Horse Monkey, charge ahead. I'll run a little further and flank him." Jingxin was still giving commands on the communication network, but when Horse Monkey saw that Horned Demon had finally wrapped things up, he eagerly ran in the direction where the Black Mist had left. Slightly later than Horse Monkey, Gardner, Cui Qinghe, and the others also agreed with Horned Demon's statement. They boarded their respective vehicles and prepared to carry out the search. Of course, Horned Demon's proposal to delay the final payment was also a very important factor. Gardner deliberately chose to pass by Horned Demon, parked the huge SUV in front of Horned Demon, and asked condescendingly, "What I'm more interested in is the extra benefit of a small situation that you mentioned. What is it?" Horned Demon replied instantly, "A key." "A key to open the door?" The specific form is, "A woman. A woman who has the ability to lock onto and open this door." Horned Demon's words nearly scared Jingxin, Horse Monkey, and the others, who were more than 10 kilometers away. They all sent messages on the communication network. "Are you crazy? Don't speak without thinking. Wu Jun is a very precious and exclusive resource. With her in hand, we can figure out many secrets. However, she only has half a month left on her shelf life. After the Toyama Auction House's spring auction, the secrets inside will be dug out in front of the world's top factions sooner or later. What's the use of grasping it? Is there enough time? Or is the parish preparing to bid? Or do you really think that the goddess of luck is my lover and that you can get her easily?" Horned Demon's words choked Jingxin and Horse Monkey. With Fat Dragon not expressing his stance, no one could stop him. On the SUV, Gardner's interest was piqued. "Do you have more detailed information?" "Of course." Hua Dian, who had been wandering around, turned back at some point in time and joined the conversation. "I also wish to obtain a piece of information to satisfy my curiosity." "Me too." Cui Qinghe's motorcycle also drove over. Horned Demon chuckled. "No problem, no problem. Everyone who sees it has a share." The information transfer was quickly completed. Gardner was satisfied. He stepped on the accelerator, and the SUV stirred up a cloud of dust as it brushed past Horned Demon. He laughed and gave a thumbs up. "Happy sharing." Horned Demon stood like a nail in the flying dust, staring at the SUV in the distance. The smile on his lips did not diminish, but it became more and more distorted. Chapter 752. Scourge. Horned Demon was a natural scourge. Luonan finally determined the nature of Horned Demon. He had been keeping an eye on Horned Demon all the way here. He believed that he had a general idea of what was going on in Horned Demon's mind, but he never expected that Horned Demon's desire for revenge would be this deep. Horned Demon was already here, but Wu Jun was still unforgiving. He was clearly the one chasing Horned Demon, but now it seemed as if Horned Demon owed him a blood debt. Wu Jun and the Xieluo Order were already in dire straits when facing the colossus that was the Amaterasu Order. If the powers behind Gardner, Hua Dian, and the others joined in, it would be hard to say how Wu Jun would respond. Polio, who was in Spring City, only had Yanfen by his side. The complex geographical environment around the U-Hole market wasn't enough to help them stay far away from danger. Speaking of which, Horned Demon was admittedly a madman, but his thoughts weren't limited to one place or one region. Instead, he could casually jump out of a rut and think about problems from the big picture. Perhaps the thoughts of a madman were more divergent, or perhaps he wished for the world to be in chaos. Luonan's 10 fingers crossed as he muttered to himself under the sunlight. Her Majesty Empress Wu's theory of being a match for 10,000 had awakened him early on, and he had the support of the mental sensor network that covered the entire world. His foundation was deep and broad, but Luonan had been affected by the counterexample of Snake Tongue in this series of events. Only then did he suddenly realize that he wasn't afraid of the danger of being devoured by extraordinaries. Compared to Horned Demon, Luonan seemed to be lacking a reckless spirit. Horned Demon wasn't the least bit afraid of adding variables to the situation. Rather than saying that he was naturally close to chaos, it would be better to say that this was the usual way of thinking of psychics. After all, psychics always had the talent and self-confidence to pluck clues from chaos. Of course, this was an implicit way of saying it. Looking at it from a different angle, it could be described as a headstrong person who couldn't see the big picture. If he couldn't come up with a logical and rigorous plan, then rolling in the mud with the enemy would be pretty good. During this process, he could use his rich combat experience to overwhelm the enemy. Yes, he had learned a move. It could be said that when three people walk together, there will always be a teacher. Luonan didn't fly into a rage out of humiliation from being taught by Horned Demon. On the contrary, the frustration from not being able to find the door to the laboratory had shifted quite a bit. That's right, it was a transfer. Luonan's inspiration was stimulated by the muddy pond technique of the Horned Demon. It also spurred his emotions. Accomplishing things was hard, but destroying things was far too easy. It seems that I'm very far away from the mud pool. Even the centaur dares to play like this inside. It should be fine for me to throw a stinky egg far away, right? Within Luonan's sensory network, the skinny face that came from Maho's face was suffused with an excited and cruel green light. It was practically overflowing, and Luonan felt a wave of annoyance when he saw it. The Amaterasu Order, as well as the forces behind them, had the guts to lay their hands on his grandfather's laboratory. They should be prepared to face the consequences. Wait a minute, isn't it too easy for them to just have rotten eggs? Luonan suddenly stood up on the yacht Ray in Ban City's Beishan Lake. He walked in circles within the limited deck area of the sunlight area. Lu raised her head in astonishment. She first believed that Luonan had encountered some unsolvable problem, but after carefully observing him a few times, she felt that something was off. Looking at that wide grin on his face, he seemed to have fallen into some kind of indescribable excitement and was unable to extricate himself for a moment. Lu opened her mouth, but in the end she decided to remain silent. This was because Luonan had walked a few circles at lightning speed before sitting back in his original position. He wrote vigorously in the virtual work area, sketching out blueprints. Luonan was skilled in the application of lines, and he had a vast and broad observation perspective. Therefore, Luonan was able to outline the topography of the Red Earth wasteland over 3,000 kilometers away with just a few strokes. It was hard not to be scribbled, but the necessary details weren't lacking at all. The larger ditches, underground rivers, surface lakes, waterways, and so on were all marked. The range was delineated, and then came the scattered combinations of dots, lines, and surfaces. They endlessly tumbled, wandered, joined, and combined within the virtual work area. The complex structure was constructed within 2 or 3 breaths of time. It even made Lu feel dizzy. The heavens took pity on her. Lu only seriously considered the logical relationship between a few details. She had crammed a lot of knowledge on configuration during this time. Regardless of its practical value, it was a shortcut to get closer to Luonan. But what this shortcut brought her was dizziness, and even the structure of her body and soul was about to be shaken and overturned. Lu hurriedly closed her eyes. She didn't dare to look. Clearly the gap between her and Luonan was too great. She was completely unqualified to evaluate on the technical level. She didn't even have the qualifications to review it. Therefore, she could only consider and judge from a more simple and intuitive perspective. Let's first set up a reference. Lu had a hand-drawn draft of Luonan's in her hands. It was the illustration he had made when he explained the connection of energy between Snake Tongue and Mr. Zweiman. Lu once believed that it would be one of the most complex blueprints she had ever seen in her life. But now, the configuration diagram which had just begun to be drawn, looked to be several times more complex than the previous draft. Lu really couldn't hold back the curiosity in her heart. She waited for a moment when Luonan stopped drawing and asked softly, "Mr. I'm building a muddy pond." I'm building a muddy pond. Let's see how those people roll around. Let's do this for now. I'll make a simple diagram. I'll fill in the details later. Lu subconsciously narrowed her eyes. She quickly shot a glance at the virtual work area. Forgive her for not having a high level of understanding, but the combination of configurations that made her dizzy were really hard to relate to the so-called simple diagram. A distance of 100 kilometers was actually nothing to the feet of a B-rank powerhouse. The amount of time Luonan spent fiddling with the configuration was enough for Horse Monkey to cross the wasteland and close the distance between the two to within 20 kilometers. Horse Monkey knew the depths of the black mist. The The process of chasing and killing in his early years made him very clear that the black mist didn't excel in mental senses. The limit of the black mist's sensing radius was approximately 300 meters. Moreover, it was very unstable. However, the warning trigger line constructed on this basis could reach as far as 10 kilometers away. It was worthy of the evaluation of a coward. For the sake of not alerting the snake, Horse Monkey suppressed the simple thought process of walking straight ahead. He very cautiously stopped 15 kilometers away and contacted Fatty Dragon once more to confirm the current situation of the black mist. Fatty Dragon expressed, "He's still there." "He's always been there?" "Yes. He's been there for at least 20 minutes. He doesn't advance, he doesn't retreat. It doesn't seem like his style." Suspicion rose in Horse Monkey's heart. Now that he was mulling over it, it was getting closer and closer to the speculation of the Horned Demon. Could it be that the black mist had some dog's hit luck and had really discovered something? He disappeared. Fatty Dragon suddenly updated his information. Horse Monkey was startled. He ran away again? He disappeared. Fatty Dragon said the same words, but his mood was a bit more serious. Horse Monkey thought of many scenarios in the blink of an eye, but none of them were reliable. While he was in a daze, his extraordinary intuition, formed from years of experience in the wasteland, suddenly awakened and rang in his mind. At the same time, the air in the surrounding area vibrated. There was a clear change in the lighting of the external environment. The shadow was like a canopy covering his head. Horse Monkey raised his head in shock as he followed the vibrating sound and the angle of the light shadow. He saw a rolling black cloud appear 30 meters in the sky. It was unknown when, but it was dark and gloomy. From time to time, it would change between light and dark. It was as if it had intercepted the sunlight from the vault of heaven, causing it to transform into a dark, treacherous, and extremely ominous color. "Horse Monkey!" Fatty Dragon's shout came crashing over. Horse Monkey's heart sank and he felt a little dizzy. It was only at this moment that he suddenly realized that he had been facing this ominous cloud for too long. There seemed to be an invisible attraction inside the dark cloud, hooking his soul, and he could not move away. This is bad. After waking up, Horse Monkey reacted instinctively. Faced with the seemingly harmless dark cloud, he immediately bounced backward, wanting to get out of the shadow formed by the dark cloud. It was also at this moment that a ray of light shone down from the dark cloud. The color was so frivolous that it was like a nightclub spotlight with a spot lens. However, it did not give him any time to think or react. It hit its mark. Horse Monkey was momentarily dazed. He leaped backward, which he would not make a mistake even if he had done it hundreds or thousands of times, inexplicably turned into a ridiculous and laughable diving error. The world spun around him, and then his face was forcefully smashed into the dry, hard red soil. It's a curse. Horse Monkey was glad that he could still make an accurate judgment, and his state of mind was still fine. Against the black mist, this was an acceptable price to pay. He did not even think about his ridiculous mistake. Instead, he rolled on the ground and adjusted his posture. At the same time, his soul power reached into the abyss, and he prayed to the Fusang divine tree that was already in position. The Fusang divine tree system of the Amaterasu cult was said to have 10 parallel suns. Each sun wheel represented a stairway to the heavens of the divine treasure. Even most of the believers, including Horse Monkey, could not reach the highest level of the ladder to receive the supreme divine treasures into their bodies. However, even the branches, leaves, and roots that had absorbed a little bit of divine power still possessed power that ordinary aptitude users could not imagine. Horse Monkey had chosen the path of exorcism, which was the best choice against the black mist. Against a spiritual expert like the black mist who was proficient in curses and attacks without form, there was no need to consider a fair duel. He had to use the most direct and effective method to crush it with absolute advantage. Horse Monkey had absolute confidence. Even though he was slightly weaker than the black mist back then, after joining the Amaterasu cult and receiving the blessing of the Fusang divine tree system, even if he had a bad start, he could instantly increase his strength level and counterattack. Moreover, he was surrounded by Fat Dragon, a powerhouse who stood at the top of the architect level. As long as he could hold the situation back, Fat Dragon could suck the dark cloud and black mist into his stomach. Chapter 753. The prayers on the spiritual level, the physical mudra, and the secret words had all been uttered. However, the coordinated movements of body, mouth, and mind, which should have been one, had inexplicably turned into a clumsy performance. No matter how casual the Amaterasu cult was, The power of the fundamental system of divine treasures was not something that could be easily summoned. Ma Hou did not even understand why his most secretive thoughts would instantly jump to a completely irrelevant and absurd concept. He had already lost his last chance to link with the system of the Fusang Divine Tree. The follow-up attack of the black fog arrived. Countless cursed rays rained down on him like a storm, crashing into his body and his mind, drowning him in an instant. Initially, Ma Hou still wanted to struggle, but under the effect of the curse, his sense of coordination and balance had been completely destroyed. Any slight exertion of force would result in a conflict with the movements of the upper and lower parts of the body, and it would lead to unpredictable consequences. His struggle had become a fatal catalyst. In a breath's time, he had completely fallen into a disorderly nightmare from the inside out, from his soul to his body. Every muscle was twitching and trembling, and every nerve had turned into a dancing snake. There was no logic to speak of. Even though he was stuck to the dry and hard ground, he could still enter a state of extreme excitement. He subconsciously wriggled up and down on the ground, then shivered and lay on the ground, like an old dog that had its final radiance. Save me. Ma Hou could no longer care about anything else. He tried to call for help, but all that came out of his throat were meaningless grunts. He wanted to project his thoughts to the internal communication network, but his mind was also messed up by the swarm of distracting thoughts. If this continued, Ma Hou suspected that the structure of his body and soul would fall apart at any time. Before that happened, his will was already on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, a bang sound exploded in his ears. The horse monkey had no idea where he came from, but right after that, the endless rays of cursed light were suddenly cut off. Seemed like it. The horse monkey's senses had dropped to the lowest point ever since he was born. He could only vaguely feel that his chaotic, disordered, and disorderly state seemed to have been alleviated. The stench of saliva, blood, and mud on his face finally stimulated his corresponding senses. Of course, there was also the feeling of stickiness. Ma Hou didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that his snot, tears, and blood were mixed with mud on his face. He subconsciously turned over, and he actually succeeded. Sunlight shone down, and the shadow that covered his body and soul in the middle had disappeared at some point. But then warm liquid drops and broken feathers sprinkled on his face and body like burrs. As for this logical relationship, he no longer had the energy to think about it. He panted heavily, and it was only then that he felt the torment of his internal organs. A strong feeling of nausea and the feeling of losing control worked together. A stream of heat gushed out from his throat, eyes, and even his nostrils like a fountain. But in essence, it was the filth stored in his stomach. It sprayed high, but in the blink of an eye, it sprayed all over his face. "I'll kill you. I'll kill you." Ma Hou mumbled as he opened and closed his mouth, but the filth poured in again. He screamed and jumped up without caring about anything else. In the blink of an eye, he fell to the ground and vomited. How unfortunate. Are you all right? Jingxin's concern came late, but he didn't appear. His true body was still 30 kilometers away, and he only sent his greetings through the internal communication network. Ma Hou was about to vomit his bile out, so he wasn't in the mood to bother with him. Jingxin also knew of Ma Hou's situation and guessed that he likely didn't know what had happened later. He gave a simple introduction. Fat Dragon exploded the surveillance vessel and used his flesh and blood to cast a curse that struck the black fog. That fellow was likely injured, but he still managed to escape. Fat Dragon is searching, but there's not much hope. Phew. Ma Hou was still panting heavily. He didn't expect Fat Dragon to avenge him, nor did he expect Jingxin to help him up. They addressed each other as brothers only because of the need for action. Hiding their relationship as members of the Amaterasu cult was also a requirement for action. They knew each other very well. They were all cold people by nature. Even when Fat Dragon had saved him previously, it was likely because he felt that he could succeed. Under such circumstances, there was no need for Ma Hou to feel resentful. Bullshit. He wanted to lash out at anyone he saw, but there was only desolate red soil around him. In fact, he had indeed ravaged the desolate plains. Now there was a shallow pit in the ground, and his crotch was wet and uncomfortable. What a nightmarish memory. F***K. 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 Ma Hou slammed the ground with all his might, causing dust to fly up. If he were a person who wanted to be dignified, he might have slit his own throat. Ma Hou wasn't that bad, but the moment he thought of the scene from before, he couldn't help but see stars as his organs burned. He couldn't understand or accept it. That fellow, the Black Fog, a coward who only knew how to backstab others, had become so terrifying. It was also a curse-style attack. It was a method that completely wiped out balance and coordination from the body and soul structure and psyche. It was impossible to defend against or dodge. If Fat Dragon hadn't taken action, Maho would definitely have died. And the power that ultimately killed him would likely have originated from him. Anger, humiliation, and fear. Negative emotions surged as they constantly drained Maho's energy. He had no intention of getting up. At that moment, Jingxin urged him. Are you feeling better? If you are, get up and get to work. Go F*** King die. Jingxin wasn't angry. Were you beaten up by the black fog again? Alright, let's be serious. Go take a look at the spot where the black fog was previously. Look at what? Remember the horned demon speculation? At present, Fat Dragon hasn't caught the black fog, but that fellow has been circling the vicinity without leaving. This doesn't match his cowardly personality at all. Perhaps he really discovered something. Don't be fooled by the fact that he's hiding somewhere. Once we dig out what he's trying to hide, I guarantee he'll jump higher than anyone else. Maho's face twitched. Regardless of his mood, he had indeed heard what Jingxin said. Jingxin struck while the iron was hot. It's not appropriate for me to appear. It's ideal for an enemy like you to go. Don't worry. Fat Dragon and I will protect you. None of your business. Maho spat and spat out the remaining filth in his mouth. He took off his shirt, revealing his thin torso. He wiped his face with the corner of his barely clean shirt, clenched his teeth, and walked towards the target area more than 10 kilometers away. At the end of the day, he was still a B-class expert. Moreover, he was the type of person whose mental and physical aspects were more balanced. When he lost his coordination, he was in a more miserable state. This was equivalent to losing his greatest advantage. From this perspective, the black fog did have a certain restraining effect on him. However, when he regained his senses and adjusted his recovery speed, it was still quite shocking. At the beginning, he was still dragging his muddy steps, and it was difficult and sluggish. After adapting to the 1-kilometer distance, his speed increased rapidly, and he soon recovered his agile and nimble body movement. Other than the sour smell all over his body, which he could not get rid of immediately, and the obvious stains on his crotch area, he was a good man again. Furthermore, during this process, Jingxin had also sent an olive branch. Ah no, it was the propping mulberry tree's branch. That fellow had learned from the horse monkey's lesson and completed the prayer a long time ago. He established a connection with the Fusang divine tree, in the abyss area, guiding its power and assimilating it. At this moment, he connected with the horse monkey and shared a portion of his perception. He could also use the power of the Fusang divine tree to help the horse monkey gradually stabilize its emotions. When they were still 2 to 3 kilometers away from the target, Jingxin suddenly said, "Something's wrong. Black fog." The horse monkey's hair nearly stood on end. No, it's just that the feeling here is very different from other places. It's as though some power has interfered with it. There are remnant traces. Horned demon is indeed a spirit medium. Yes, the black fog isn't bad either. It really made him discover a problem. Jingxin was somewhat excited. The horse monkey finally jumped out of the shadows of the black fog and thought of the most important mission they had come for today. Is this the laboratory's door? Yes, it's still too early to make a conclusion. We need to observe further, but the possibility is very high. Jingxin analyzed the black fog's behavior in passing. That fellow, the black fog, came for Luo Yuandao's laboratory, but it wasn't willing to take the risk. However, after passing by and seeing some clues, it dispelled the thought of leaving and wanted to monopolize it. This is very much in line with the thoughts of a treasure hunter, but it's not the thoughts of an appraiser. Yes, it's quite reliable. Jingxin gave his analysis a thumbs up before contacting the horned demon. Quick, come over and take a look. Let's see if it matches. In a blink of an eye, he said to the horse monkey, "Be careful. The black fog might jump out at any moment." However, Jingxin's judgment was wrong this time. The black fog didn't appear again, as though it no longer had any thoughts about this place. Or perhaps it had suffered an incurable injury from its previous battle with Fat Dragon. Fat Dragon, who had failed in his pursuit, couldn't make a judgment either. He had completely lost track of the black fog. Jingxin analyzed again. Perhaps it's afraid. Your relationship with Fat Dragon will likely be exposed. Your identity can't be hidden anymore. Thankfully, everyone knows that he doesn't like to use his brain. It's very normal for him to have someone as his secretary. However, you aren't very competent as a secretary. I'm going to kill him. This him was naturally referring to him. When the horse monkey didn't see the black fog, his terrible emotions surged again. He paced back and forth on the red ground that didn't look any different. He was extremely vexed. His footsteps became heavier and heavier. Finally, he couldn't help but stomp his feet to vent his frustration. 1 kick, 2 kicks, 3 kicks. There was a muffled sound and the red soil under his feet suddenly collapsed. Before Horse Monkey could regain his balance, there was another long chi sound and hot steam gushed out. Although it was not enough to hurt Horse Monkey, who was a B-class expert, it still gave him a fright. His crotch instinctively shrank back and he jumped back. What's that? Chapter 754. Monkey certainly did not want more people to see him in such a pathetic state. However, things did not go as he wished. The search, which was purely based on luck, had just begun. Most people were still wandering aimlessly without a clear direction. At this time, a small change or accident could easily attract people's attention. At the same time, as Jing Xian had said, the minds of treasure hunters and the surveyors were completely different. As the designers behind the scenes, the Amaterasu sect's way of thinking was closer to that of the surveyors. Hence, sharing information and increasing efficiency became the best choice. From Monkey's humiliating failure to the discovery of a geothermal geyser, the entire process took about half an hour. The time taken to attract others was even shorter. In less than 20 minutes, most of the participants had gathered around the newly discovered geothermal mud area. To be precise, except for Anthony, the priest, and Vanta, the dean of the Welfare Institute, everyone else had arrived to study the latest discovery. Of course, they also had to eliminate the black fog that had been chased away by Fatty Dragon. With so many people here, Monkey, as the first discoverer, had to give a reason. At this time, hiding the truth was not an option. Only a fool would reveal everything. After discussing with Jingxin and company, Horse Monkey described the old grudge between him and the black fog in a deadpan manner. He casually summarized the pursuit and the subsequent analysis and pursuit, completing the relevant logical chain. Of course, some of the hidden meanings needed to be discovered by smart people. There was no shortage of smart people on the scene. Gardner stared at Monkey's face and did not hide his ridicule at all. It sounds like you drove the black fog away and then found this place that he was trying to hide. But looking at you now, it looks more like a victory. Also, although I'm not good at sensing, the abyss area seemed to be very lively just now. Brother Monkey, the black fog, who else was it? Gardner then looked at Fatty Dragon, who was also staring at him expressionlessly. Their eyes met. Even though Gardner was also a burly man, compared to the huge fat dragon, he was still an order of magnitude weaker, and it was the same in terms of strength. Gardner looked unruly, but he had his own plans. He did not want to lose to Fatty Dragon, who was one of the top grade B powerhouses. He laughed and waved his hand. We all know what's going on with Fatty Dragon. 1 or 2 more of you from the Amaterasu cult won't scare me to death. Why do you have to be so secretive? Moreover, it's not a good habit to neglect work for personal reasons. Fat Dragon was always numb and stiff. Maho's face turned green, red, and green. It changed back and forth 7 or 8 times, but in the end he still clenched his teeth and didn't say anything. At this time, the centaur stood up in a timely manner and mediated in a decent manner. As I said, this is an uncertain opportunity. It is a gamble. I don't mind if any party wants to increase the probability of harvest by increasing their investment. In fact, I welcome it. Of course, I also hope that I can open less SMUF accounts to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. But then again, compared to Fatty Dragon and you guys opening SMUF accounts, I am more dissatisfied with Mr. Black Mist who slipped away. Everyone has paid the price and none of us want to miss the opportunity. That's why I propose the idea of sharing. Only when we get our hands on the treasure can we talk about distribution. In fact, the word distribution was almost meaningless in Luo Yuandao's laboratory. It was indeed a huge fortune, but to dig a piece of the treasure mountain, it still required enough knowledge, insight, and luck. In this context, cooperation and sharing were more important. I have emphasized this point many times, but that narrow-minded guy, Black Mist, still sees this operation as a crude and low-level treasure hunting operation. He said that he wants to quit, but in fact he wants to take everything for himself. So that guy has pissed me off. If he dares to show up again, I will stand on your side, Mr. Maho. The centaur, Maho, and Fatty Dragon had unified their positions, but it was not suspicious. After all, no matter what the crazy centaur decided, it was not surprising. Similarly, whoever he stood with, other than the enemy, his teammates were no exception. Gardner responded with a smile. I don't mind helping to get rid of a stingy guy, but I would like to have reliable and useful information. What I'm more interested in right now is what the black fog has discovered. Can anyone give me a definite answer? At present, it seems to be a geothermal hot spring. While the few of them were reflecting their positions, Huadian had already circled around the mud several times. At this time he casually analyzed, the plateau north of the Himalayas has always been an area rich in geothermal energy. It is not strange for a geothermal hot spring and mud to appear here. I have checked the topographic map, and there is an underground waterway nearby that is connected to the surface saltwater lake dozens of kilometers away. Gardner laughed again when he heard that. Oh, it seems that you're quite lucky, monkey. If you stomped your feet a little harder earlier, you might have broken through the magma chamber below. That kind of feeling? Maho glared at Gardner. He really had a taste of this guy's foul mouth. Compared to Gardner, who only wanted to take advantage of others with his mouth, Huadian, who was a detective, was more interested in the environment around the geothermal hot spring mud pool and the traces left behind. There is still some distance between the underground aquifer and the surface. The heat pipes in the magma chamber don't seem to be enough to form a huge water pressure, causing it to gush out. In comparison, Mr. Maho's stomping seems even more insignificant. Therefore, I think that between the two stimulating elements of the magma chamber and the stomping of feet, there should be another stimulating force. Even now, it is still in effect. But we are close at hand, yet we can't detect it. Seeing that someone had cut to the chase, Jingxin immediately raised his hand in agreement. I have never been to the deep blue world, nor do I know how the plane affects the structure of spacetime. However, this mechanism is also something I have never heard of or seen before, so I would like to ask Mr. Maho, is it possible for the portal to Luo Yuandao's laboratory to be transferred to the surface? Just like the portal to the deep blue world, it is located 10,000 meters deep at the bottom of the sea? Maho frowned. He really couldn't be sure about this matter. The laboratory portal I saw was pulled by an exclusive instrument. Therefore, even if it moves, it is limited to a certain extent. Now that all the instruments have been removed, I don't know if the portal will directly sink into the ground. Tens of hundreds of meters deep in the ground seems to be meaningless for such a huge spacetime structure. Chapter 755. The people around them looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. In an unknown and destined complex environment, it was too difficult for a group of psychics who were known for their sensitivity to be squeezed together. This might be a bewitching array. Cui Qinghe of the Order of Justice was one of the few physical experts in the group, so he was more used to such an environment. However, he also expressed a cautious attitude. We haven't discovered anything related to the laboratory's door. All our suspicions stem from the appearance of this mud, at the periphery of the search zone? Are you saying that this might be a joke by the Black Fog? Yes, a nasty joke. Jingxin and Horned Demon quickly communicated through the internal communication network, but they were unsure in the end. It was necessary to investigate, but how to investigate and whether it was worth investing a lot of time and energy was a problem that needed to be determined. Huadian, on the other hand, made a suggestion. I have a Dao mark, a gadget that I made myself. It can basically be understood as a kind of paint that can mark the effects of various powers. It's especially sensitive to beyonder powers, which is the interaction between the mind and matter. I can put it down to verify it. The others understood what he meant. Luo Yuandao's laboratory, which they were searching for, could basically be considered a natural effect. If they discovered strong traces of beyonder powers, there was no need to say anything. It was a counterfeit nest and everyone could just turn around and leave. Jingxin raised his hand and suggested, we have to probe deeper. We can't sense it at the moment, so it might be because the place of effect is relatively hidden. For example, it might be hidden near the magma chamber's lava pipes and directly trigger an eruption. It's not impossible for the Black Fog spirit body to do this. That's natural, but my abilities are limited. In such a complex area, I can at most make the Dao marker sink 100 meters or so. Compared to the thickness of the Earth's crust, it's just too insignificant. To be able to form a geothermal mud hot spring, the rock layer should be relatively thin. As long as we can probe the fault zone beneath the hot spring, it'll be fine. Something like stimulating the magma chamber and causing the water storage rock layer to break is not something that the Black Fog, who can only draw circles and curse, can do. Gardner, who had the worst mouth, had a rare analysis and most people agreed with him. As he spoke, he even walked to the back of his off-road vehicle. Under the watchful eyes of the group, he took out a box of equipment from the trunk. He then opened the front and back doors of the car, as well as the cover of the car's roof. The interface of the dashboard, which was rich in functions, was revealed. I can add another round of assistance. In the complicated terrain of the wasteland, I believe in the equipment more than my own senses. The centaur whistled. Inside the equipment box that Gardner took out were precision components that were neatly arranged. Some of them were slightly combined to form a round probe ball. Although the functions of the A9 detector produced by Lamar don't seem to be top-notch, it is the most portable professional instrument in the field of complex terrain exploration. It had a wealth of functional modules such as optical imaging, metal detection, life detection, terrain mapping. You could always find the one that suited you. Well, the advertising time was over. There was still one problem to solve. In this kind of mud, normal propellers can't work, not to mention the underground rock formation and water flow. I need a buddy who can provide power at least to help this little thing cross the harsh area in front. When it enters the underground river, it will be more sensitive than any living fish. Several B-level aptitude users looked left and right, and finally, their eyes all focused on Fat Dragon's face. The latter turned around and left without saying a word. Ma Ho then endured the gazes of all parties, and his thin face barely squeezed out a smile. He's going to find a suitable tool. It shouldn't take long. In fact, only about 7 or 8 minutes later, Fat Dragon reappeared in everyone's field of vision. He was still holding a living thing that looked like a frog in his hand. Hua Dian was knowledgeable and recognized it at once. Cloth bag demon frog, a specialty of the plateau. This is rare. Fat Dragon asked Gardner for the probe ball, and Hua Dian had already stuffed his beacon into the storage area of this thing before. The probe ball was in his left hand, and the demon frog was in his right. It was obvious that the probe ball, which was about the size of a volleyball, was much bigger than the cloth bag demon frog. But Fat Dragon didn't care. He squeezed the cloth bag demon frog twice, and after 2 muffled croaks, the greenish-gray cloth bag demon frog began to expand rapidly. It even opened its mouth, and its cracked upper and lower jaws were even more exaggerated than the diameter of its expanding body. It easily stuffed the probe ball in. With a few wriggles of its tough skin and flesh, the probe ball firmly sank into the abdomen of the cloth bag demon frog and kept spinning. Genius idea. Gardner snapped his fingers and turned on the probe ball. After adjusting the parameters and eliminating the influence of the skin and flesh of the cloth bag demon frog, he confirmed that everything was correct and made an OK gesture. Fat Dragon threw away the demon frog that had really expanded into a bulging cloth bag in his hand and threw the mutant into the still churning mud. Due to the terrible environmental conditions, the optical imaging module of the probe ball was not turned on. However, the thermal imaging and various detection wave technologies were still trustworthy, and the network connection was still stable. As the cloth bag demon frog sank, the structure of the lower layer of the geothermal mud hot spring that suddenly emerged was gradually outlined and enriched with details on the projection screen of the control panel of Gardner's SUV. Gardner acted as a temporary technician and he was very used to the role. As he continued to adjust the relevant parameters, the outline and change trend of the soil, rock strata, and water flow were constantly smeared in the projection area. There was also more detailed data such as temperature, pH, and the composition of various elements. After eliminating the interference of the cloth bag demon frog's body, it appeared one after another. These pictures and data were enough for everyone to make some preliminary judgments. Gardner explained while operating, and he was basically able to reach a consensus with everyone. The soil and rock strata are relatively thin. Most of the area is like this, and it's possible that it was broken by the high pressure. The mineral composition is more complicated, and it's closer to the magma chamber below. It should be a metamorphic rock that was formed due to the influence of the magma chamber. This is the result of a long period of time. The youngest trace here is probably the radiation residue from World War III. The temperature continues to rise and the magma chamber is indeed more active. Anyway, I refuse to go down to explore with my body. Hey Mr. Detective, is there any reaction from your paint? There is. Fortunately, it will show different thermal gradients, which is convenient for the instrument to sense. Hua Dian asked if he could join in the operation. After getting Gardner's permission, he adjusted some of the parameters in the thermal imaging system. In the blink of an eye, the interface that was still relatively clear was covered in overly gorgeous colors. Hey. Sorry, allow me to simplify. How about this? I'll set the effect of transcendent power to red, and the other natural forces to white. This will be the most intuitive. Chapter 756. TSK. There are many capable people in this world. That was quite dangerous. Luonan sighed. He reached out to scratch his head and let out a sigh. Lu had raised her head for the umpteenth time to look at Luonan. She felt quite helpless. Luonan was completely immersed right now, but he was definitely not a calm and unperturbed manipulator behind the scenes. He would sigh and comment from time to time. He couldn't even be considered a qualified spectator. At least for Lu, a pitiful person who couldn't even be a spectator, it was far too cruel. Lu felt like a cat was scratching her heart. What in the world happened in the wasteland 3,000 kilometers away? What kind of reaction would happen when 10 B-rank powerhouses converge under the arrangement of an inconceivable person like Luonan? Such a scene did not happen every year, even in the inner world. Luonan was able to observe the process of transformation, let alone from a godlike perspective. Right? Lu really didn't know how Luonan was able to observe the scene 3,000 kilometers away. She was unable to understand what kind of perspective it was. The more it was like this, the more her curiosity rapidly expanded. Soon, it crushed the sense of responsibility and professionalism that a secretary should have. In the end, she couldn't help but open her mouth and whisper, "Mister? Mister? Yes. Mister, can you tell me the current situation over there? My intelligence analysis will be useful." It was thanks to Li's long experience in the business world that she didn't blush and expose herself for such a terrible reason. However, she still successfully attracted Luonan's attention. He turned to look at her and blinked. Soon he came to a realization. "You want to know the situation over there? You want to see?" Lu hurriedly nodded. It was bad to be reserved at times like this. Appropriate intimacy was what set her apart from a workaholic like He Yuan. Lu admired herself for being able to find such a powerful reason for herself in such a short amount of time. Reality proved that this move was really effective. Right now, the group of people in the wasteland were still tossing and turning around things like instruments and road signs. The pace was relatively calm, and Luonan had the leisure time to chat with Lu. In truth, Li's request was a bit excessive, but Luonan didn't mind. Ever since he entered the inner world circle, he was mostly fawned upon by his friends in the Xia City branch due to his young age. He created trouble and the others helped him deal with the trouble. Even if someone made some requests, they would think it over and over again to ensure that it was within a reasonable range. Someone like Lu, who clearly knew that she was crossing the line, but still acted like a spoiled child and begged. Well, this could be counted as acting like a spoiled child. At the very least, this kind of method was rare. So Luonan didn't feel offended. On the contrary, he felt that this was rather novel and interesting. He didn't want to refuse. At the same time, he was used to considering problems from the perspective of others. After pondering for a while, he said, "It's fine if you want to see it." "Really?" Li's eyes were immediately filled with joy. Even she couldn't tell how much of it was real and how much of it was embellished. Luonan didn't care about these little details. He just followed his established train of thought and continued speaking. "There's a problem. You need to be mentally prepared. I'm afraid you're not used to it. Yes, you're temporarily unable to adapt to the impact of the information flow on my sensory network. It's definitely impossible to directly sense it. Do you understand what I mean?" Lu was startled and frowned. "I can roughly understand." The amount of information collected by a spiritual network that was several thousand kilometers away was undoubtedly enormous. Needless to say, Luonan's perception ability was close to that of a god. The pressure was certainly not something that an average person could endure. So? If you really want to see it immediately, I can only help you transfer it. It won't be a direct, comprehensive clairvoyance. Instead, I'll help you filter it. I'll let you see what you see. Wasn't this very normal? Lu immediately responded, "This isn't a problem." No. You don't understand what I mean. If you want to accept my transfer, then you need to accept the stimulation I give you on the mental plane. It goes deep into the various planes of the senses. It isn't real to you and it's easy to confuse you. At the same time, Lu already understood halfway through Luonan's words. She understood it very thoroughly. The only thing she didn't understand was whether this underage gentleman before her was displaying his true colors as a straight man or if he was trying to open up a new domain of social relations. Since this was the case, Lu stopped short and replied, "I've studied Mr.'s theory. I can understand." Luonan's prison theory had an extremely famous invasion thesis. It referred to the fact that there was no public space on the mental plane. There was only the difference between being active and being passive. Active contact and invasion had similar meanings. This thesis exposed the direct and crude nature of the mental domain. It left a deep impression on people. Even if one wasn't on the mental side, one could still say one thing, two, three, four, let alone a professional like Yin Lu. I don't mind. I can't mind. Whether it was 4 months ago when the madam asked for your help or the long period of time that followed, I had to adapt and accept these things. These words flashed through Yin Li's mind, but she didn't say them out loud. Being overly straightforward and revealing wouldn't help the two deepen their relationship. Instead, it would cause the subtle and harmonious atmosphere to turn into the most awkward of situations. This was the subtlety of humans. Even if the other knew the thoughts in each other's hearts, even if there were more straightforward actions, there would always be a buffer space as long as the other didn't say it out loud. There were all sorts of emotions and delusions that could be wantonly operated within this space, developing countless possibilities. This buffer space was the area that Yin Lu was working hard to manage in the present and future. She would only expand this space, not the other way around. In comparison, Luonan was the one who truly revealed his true colors as a straight man. On this level he was still an immature little boy. He lacked the ability to control complex and subtle relationships. He always wanted to express something, to expose something, to let everything operate under the control of reason. As a god, he had the qualifications to pursue this kind of model. But as a man he was far from being mature. Yin Li's state of mind was a bit excited when her thoughts touched upon this level, but she controlled these subtle changes very well. She didn't deliberately express her affection. Instead, she used the most business-like attitude to look at Luonan attentively. What do I need to do in order to receive your information, mister? Well, you basically don't need to do anything. I'll gradually introduce the information and form the relevant stimulation. Let's slowly try it out and see what level is most appropriate. Chapter 757. Yin Lu obeyed Luonan's orders. She sat upright, crossed her hands on her knees and closed her eyes. The light from the outside world only left behind a faint red shadow that passed through her eyelids. The bright colors that came from over 3,000 kilometers away quickly flooded the boundaries of her senses and surged in. No, this wasn't the true scenery of the wasteland. Instead, it was a gift from the godlike yet immature boy beside her. When this rippling thought spread out, the vivid images of Centaur, Fat Dragon, Gardener, Huadian, and other grade B powerhouses that only existed in the intelligence data were also reflected in this filtered color environment one after another. Yin Lu saw that everyone who participated in this transaction, aside from Black Mist, Anthony, and Wanta, had gathered at the edge of a churning pool of mud. They surrounded a projection area on top of an off-road vehicle and started discussing. The atmosphere was quite lively. They're probing this mud pool that I created to see if there are any traces of supernatural power. Luonan explained what happened before to Yin Lu in a few words. Yin Lu asked in shock, have they already discovered it? Have they realized that there's someone behind them? Not yet. Luonan explained in a bit more detail on this point. It's true that I used a configuration and corresponding supernatural power to create this mud pool and the other things after it. However, the point of use was buried a bit deeper in order to make full use of the terrain's geothermal energy. From the looks of it, it's still far beyond the range of their probing. On the other hand, the traces left behind by some interference effects when they were observing their senses are quite heavy. Fortunately, they didn't think that I was listening to them while they were discussing, so they gave me a chance to destroy the corpses and erase the traces. Of course, this is also because Detective Hua Dian's sensing precision is only on the micron level. Although the road mark he made is quite ingenious in structure and has a few bonuses, it's still a bit difficult to reach the level of water molecules. Yin Lu, who was a specialist in the mental side, had no confidence to discuss this topic at all. However, Luonan still used his unique frame of reference to reflect on himself. Actually, this can be considered luck. The group of people here, whether it's Hua Dian or the others here, aren't experts in this field. Dean Wanta, who isn't here, shouldn't be inferior to me in terms of sensing precision. His sensitivity to changes in physical properties will only be stronger than mine. I can only surpass him in terms of range and breadth. Therefore, in order to ensure a stable layout, I need to put more effort into the configuration design. I need to utilize the power of nature as much as possible to build a ladder of interference on the mental plane. This is my mother's specialty. Dean Wan is also very proficient in it, but he certainly won't be happy to hear this description. Yin Lu was able to understand some of Luonan's words, but she was better at chatting. She introduced the corresponding material at the right time. I once heard the madam say that when there is an enormous disparity in the precision and breadth of the senses between people, the weak are simply unable to touch the lower limits of the domain of the strong. The weak are at a loss. It is as if they have encountered an unfathomable fate. They can only be controlled by the so-called fate. This was undoubtedly a compliment. Even if Luo Nan lacked social experience, he could still hear the hidden meaning in Yin Li's words. He laughed out loud, but it wasn't because he was flattered. At the very least, it wasn't completely. It just so happens that I've heard of a saying. It's specifically for us psychics, and it's related to fate. When we successfully communicate with the spirit, we can capture the development of the situation. It's the same as flirting with the goddess of fate. His voice suddenly faded away. Luo Nan instinctively felt that this topic wasn't suitable to continue. He pursed his lips. It just so happened that the people by the quagmire had reached a consensus. Aside from Cui Qinghe, who was riding a motorcycle, they all jumped into off-road vehicles. They didn't collect the probe balls they had thrown into the mud. They headed straight northwest. Yinli seemed to have completely forgotten the topic of fate. She naturally asked the reason for the change. What are they going to do? Just listen carefully to the conversation. Luo Nan quickly returned to the technical level. He was like a post-production producer. He selectively provided Yin Lu with enhanced and rendered information images. Of course, he didn't forget to outline the main clues. They discovered an underground river and a lava pipe that runs parallel to this river. This pipe connects two magma chambers beneath the rock formation. It allows the magma chambers to form a link. This kind of terrain is uncommon. It's also very confusing. It just so happens that they can make use of it. So, they believe that it's the mighty power of nature. It's the arrangement of fate. Yin Li's soft voice entered his ears. Luo Nan's eyebrows jumped. Why did they go back? When he turned his head to look, he saw that the beautiful woman beside him still had her eyes closed. Her expression was focused, as if those words were just natural sentiments that came from the bottom of her heart. At the same time, the group of horned demons on the wasteland had indeed thrown the possibility of supernatural powers to the back of their minds. Gardner faced the oncoming sandstorm on the off-road vehicle. He raised his voice. 140 kilometers of underground river. That pitiful bag frog must persevere for over 30 kilometers. Otherwise, the underwater thrusters of the probe balls won't be able to reach the bottom of the lake. Fatty Dragon, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, replied coldly, "They will find the relay." In the back seat, Jingxin also shouted against the wind. "Have you followed up on the latest satellite images of that lake? Satellite orbit changes are very expensive. The follow-up satellite relay will take 4 minutes. But don't worry. I have a hunch that the big baby is still restless because of the big furnace under its butt." Gardner slapped the center console and yelled in a tone that no one could understand. It seemed that the latest discovery and the increasing possibilities made his mood more and more comfortable. In fact, this group of people were mostly in the same mood. Even Ma Ho, who had the smell of dirt, couldn't help but reveal a smile on his skinny face as he was given the least space in the back seat. Once again, the horned demon clicked on the satellite image obtained from Gardner's channel. On a clear day, the striking body of water was like boiling water. The center of the lake had white waves and huge bubbles. If it wasn't for a series of intelligence such as the combination of satellite images, geological exploration data, and their own detection results, and a collective brainstorming analysis, it would have been impossible for them to discover the lava transmission network between the two magma chambers. It was even more impossible for them to associate an inconspicuous mud pond with a lake that was 140 kilometers away. This was undoubtedly the work of nature. The possibility of human action could be completely ruled out. Even if they thought about it in the worst-case scenario, it was just a joke by the goddess of fate. How could there be so many coincidental jokes in the world? Chapter 758. It took the Centaur and the others more than an hour to cover the distance of 140 kilometers, and part of the time was spent waiting for the probe ball to pass through the underground river. As Fat Dragon said, he found a relay mutant courier for the probe ball in time. The underwater propulsion system that Garner boasted about was also not bad, and it overcame the complicated waterway environment in the second half of the journey. Coupled with the integrated multi-wave detection module and the landmark provided by Hua Dian, the underground river and the underlying structure of the more than 10 square kilometers of water in front of them became clear bit by bit in the corresponding projection area on the cross-country road. There were also the gray and white lines that were constantly smearing, still firmly supporting the assertion of non-transcendent power effect. Of course, with the expansion of the detection range, some dark red spots were inevitably dyed in the gray and white colors. Hua Dian sighed. The number of mutants in the surroundings has increased significantly. This lake is not large, but a relatively stable mutant ecosphere has formed around it. It's not peaceful at all. The centaur was very calm. This is normal. Those small spots are small. As long as we can find the corresponding point and confirm that they are not man-made. As he spoke, he looked at Fat Dragon. The latter shook his head slightly, indicating that he did not find anything special. The centaur clapped again. So far, there is still no large-scale, continuous and effective effect of extraordinary power. It can basically be determined that there is no possibility of human interference in the whole thing. Then, let's ignore those things and focus on searching for the source of this abnormal effect, which is under the lake and around it. Garnard shrugged. The pollution here is quite serious. Looking at the history of the 3 wars, there was a nuclear bomb exploding in the air nearby. God knows why those people went to the plateau to wash the land with a nuclear bomb. Everyone turned to look at the lake. At this time, the center of the lake was boiling due to the high temperature, and the edge showed a slightly green color. Overall, it was quite clear. They could even see the shadows of fish swimming. It was full of vitality, and there were no signs of serious radiation pollution at all. Fat Dragon hooked his finger, and the surface of the water near the shore exploded. A half-meter big fish that was swimming underwater jumped out of the water. It had ferocious bone spikes, and there were dense parasites twisting in its lower abdomen. The terrible visual effect made Maho curse. *CK. Hua Dian also scratched his head. The mutant species is very rich, and the number of high-threat species is unknown. The most troublesome part is the complicated terrain at the bottom of the lake. The center of the lake is affected by the turbulence of the magma chamber and is very unstable. If we go there directly, we might be cooked by the lava and steam that are nearly 1,000 degrees hot. There's no problem with the probe ball. Just leave it there. This isn't considered an extreme environment. Gardner took charge of everything. However, we'll need manpower to scout the surrounding areas. It's not a big deal to drink a few mouthfuls of dirty water. The main thing is whether you are willing to invest the time and energy. The centaur looked around and saw that the other 6 people had no objections, so he clapped his hands. If there are no objections, things are simple. Let's split into an area and search separately. Not only under the water but also around the lake. Let's take turns and share information. As the centaur said, with a goal, the division of labor was not a problem. The dangers on land and underwater were about the same. Even if a powerful B rank couldn't resist the radiation damage, they could quickly remove the negative effects with the help of professional equipment. This was a part of exploring the wilderness, so there was nothing to fuss about. Gardner and the centaur were the first to enter the water. After changing their equipment, the former came over and greeted the centaur. You're not particularly annoying when it comes to doing things. We're the same. I hope we can keep this up. The centaur and Gardner bumped fists. They looked like they appreciated each other's talents. Yin Lu, who was 3,000 kilometers away, continued to observe for over an hour. She couldn't help but be a bit worried when she saw this scene. Sir, the centaur's role-playing is very brilliant. At the very least, he has brought these people together in action. Is the method you arranged for nearby? The activation time? Luonan didn't respond all this time. Yin Lu closed her eyes and most of her perception was replaced. She couldn't sense her surroundings in time. She was a bit flustered for a moment and subconsciously opened her eyes. The colors of reality and illusion interweaved. Both were slightly shaken and it took a while for them to separate and stabilize. Only now did Yin Lu clearly see Luonan's movements. She didn't know when the young sir had brought up the psychic map in the virtual work area. His finger traced the clouds and the sea tornado, occasionally smearing. Looking at his focused appearance, it seemed that he had already thrown the matter 3,000 kilometers away to the back of his mind. Yin Lu couldn't help but remind him, Sir, they've almost found the source. Oh, got it. Just keep an eye on him. Then, sir, regarding the overall situation, some elements need to be added or subtracted at any time. The centaur and fat dragon represent the Amaterasu order. Since they're jumping around like this, I'm considering whether or not to add them in. Yin Lu unconsciously held her breath. She couldn't hold her voice and cried out involuntarily, Pull them in? We're in Ban City. The Amaterasu order was one of the 3 great secret orders of the inner world. Their Pope and true God were publicly recognized as the two apex extraordinary powers. Although the top 5 true gods of the world were nowhere to be seen all year round, the Pope resided in the Amaterasu Pure Land in the seas outside of Ban City. It was already stressful enough to move around under the eyes of the other. Could they not take the initiative to provoke them and make it sound so easy? Luo Nan understood Yin Li's thoughts very well. Yeah, it's best if we don't have a powerful enemy. Therefore, I've done my best to reduce my presence in the wasteland. From the looks of it, the results are okay. But it's not appropriate to completely stay out of it. I need to construct a suitable environment. I need to cut a slice in that small area and study the wind outside. See the big from the small? That's right. I've drawn a circle here. These people can't see it, but I need to test whether or not the masters behind them can see it and how much they can see. It's not just the Amaterasu Order. There's also the Order of Justice, the Military Quantum Corporation, and others. I need to take a look. Chapter 759. Take a glance. Is it? Yin didn't understand half of Luo Nan's calculations, but she finally understood what lay behind Luo Nan's series of actions. It was an ambition and boldness that exceeded her imagination, as well as the corresponding enormous risk. Frankly speaking, this made her tremble with fear. It was the kind of instinctive fear and reverence that came from the bottom of life, that came from being in the shadow of a towering mountain. Fear of danger, and sigh. But soon Yin came to a realization. She shouldn't touch the level that was clearly higher than her future upper limit. Rather than being unbearably fearful because of the high and dangerous wind and snow, she might as well attach herself to the lush meadow at the foot of the mountain. She would know the yin and yang, and she would flatter the clear rain. Besides, did she have any other choice? Yin Lu, who had lived under Lady Halder's shadow for many years, was very good at clarifying her own position. She was able to quickly adjust her mental state based on this foundation. She immediately shifted the focus of her attention to a domain that she could understand and accept. If we want to attract attention in the wasteland, it shouldn't be enough to just rely on the door of the laboratory, right? After all, that's part of the plan. The situation can be considered good. So there must be conflict. But the Centaur's acting is pretty good right now, and this group of people are all drama queens. They're using a script of peaceful inspection. This analogy isn't bad. Luo Nan praised. He finally raised his head to look at her. You're right. It's impossible to count on them to make a mistake on the stage. Then we can only look backstage. Backstage? Yin Lu analyzed the meaning of the word. All sorts of conjectures appeared in her mind for a time, but none of them were complete and clear. And right now, in the wasteland over 3,000 kilometers away, the Centaur and the others didn't have any thoughts of stage or backstage. They energetically searched the bottom of the lake and the shore. Their enthusiasm was in full swing. It looked as if victory was close at hand. In reality, no one knew how long this process of approaching victory would last. The saltwater lake they were searching was in a rather serious state of pollution. The residual radiation would more or less affect the operation of the instruments. And the complex and rich mutant species in the water represented large and small conflicts. Even though the 7 searchers were all B-rank powerhouses with superhuman physiques, they still consumed a large amount of time and energy to submerge and resurface a few times. The only good news was that they were continuously narrowing down the area of influence. By noon, they had basically limited the area of influence of the abnormal power to 3 square kilometers around the magma chamber below the rock stratum at the bottom of the lake. However, if the depth and thickness of the water and rock strata were calculated, the remaining work was still a huge one. Jingxin had just come ashore after his previous shift. His clothes hadn't dried yet, so he couldn't help but grumble over the internal comms. From the looks of it, the chances of the underwater teleportation portal I hope for are getting smaller. If I had known that Brain Demon was so unreliable, I would have asked him for the password to the safe before he joined the operation. Now it was Ma Ho and Jingxin's turn to search on the shore. The former had yet to completely crawl out of the shadow of his defeat to the black fog. He temporarily lost the mood to joke and directly suggested, "Get Gardner to contact his superiors and have them airlift the equipment over. We'll directly crack open the rock stratum at the bottom of the lake." Now, they could basically confirm that this guy was a spy from the military, right? Damn it, he doesn't even bother to hide it. Under the water, the Centaur simply replied, "The military thinks it's the smell of rust." Jingxin analyzed a step further. Maybe it's Team AB. Maybe it's directly under the Star Alliance. Given their size, they won't be interested in monopolizing the laboratory. No matter who gets it, they'll have to invite them to join in. Ma Hou found it strange. Then why are they taking off their pants to fart? All they need to do is wait for the various families to offer up their offerings. Because their internal relationships are more chaotic than those outside. God knows who will eat the offerings in the end. It's good to weigh it ahead of time. It's because it's weighing that they can't do it with great fanfare. Jingxin was truly slacking off. He had nothing better to do, so he chatted with Ma Hou. He casually evaluated the other participants. That guy Cui Qinghe is just a tool to act as the eyes of others. Li Taixing and the upper echelons of the Order of Justice behind him are the ones who should be the most vigilant. The Order of Justice has been preaching about the Gate of Truth for many years. There's nothing wrong with forcefully relying on the plane. They won't hold back just because they lost the secret words first ablatum. This is the case in Xia City, let alone in these wastelands. Deep down, Jingxin was still rather fearful of his peers. He simply ignored the others. Hua Dian might be a mercenary from some financial group. It's impossible for him to go all out. Saint Anthony, on the other hand, hasn't come yet. There's not much to talk about when it comes to the ideals of the order. If there's a conflict, we'll just fight. There's also that Dean Welfare. I can't figure him out for now, but he feels like a backpacker who's wandering the wastelands. It can't be a coincidence, right? Jingxin's nagging flooded the internet. The others were silent for a time. Jingxin responded to this in a good way. He instantly changed the topic. Hey Horn Demon. Old pal. Don't you want to release more information about the laboratory? At the very least, its overall structure needs to be described more clearly. Otherwise, we might not even recognize it and miss it. Several seconds passed before Horn Demon replied, There's no need for me to repeat it over and over again. Besides, I have no way of accurately describing it. As I said before, it was a labyrinth. Luo Yuandao's laboratory is placed at the entrance of the maze, but it will occasionally venture deep into the maze due to complicated factors. At that time, the laboratory will be like a hanging basket by the side of a well. It will prevent you from falling into a bottomless hole. Oh, it's just a description. Horn Demon was helpless against Jingxin's boredom. Let me make another suggestion. Rigorous researchers and careful explorers will be safer there. However, the greatest harvest still belongs to the lucky fellows. The last lucky person was Luo Yuan. I hope I can be the next one. Jingxin chuckled. In the various wilderness laboratories, there's a publicly acknowledged law. All luck is accumulated on accidents, corpses. How many people are you planning on letting die for you? I don't know either, so all of you be careful. Out of professional ethics, I will try my best to push your priorities to the back. As for the other participants, I hope that we can reach a consensus. What do you mean by consensus? Physical bodies first. Those with no one behind them first. Of course, if I were to line up, I would kick that bastard gardener in first. It's not only because he has a physical body, but also because he has a disgusting mouth. At this moment, Jingxin and Monkey laughed strangely, but they were also vigilant. It was probably because they had renewed their understanding of Horn Demon's powerful grudge. It was also at this moment that Fat Dragon's thought interjected. This powerhouse, who always maintained his calm or stiff state, reminded them in a timely manner, it's time to change shifts. Also cut the crap. It's too wasteful. Yes, Captain. I'll follow your orders. He had no choice but to listen. This internal communication network was built based on Fat Dragon's mental network. To him, every single word of the conversation that flooded the screen was an extra burden. Although the burden was as light as nothing, Horn Demon began to turn around. In fact, he didn't like the environment at the bottom of the lake. Even if he risked radiation damage and took a mouthful of lake water, he would get a terrible chaotic outcome. This was not a good sign for a psychic. Perhaps he should try taking something more substantial from the bottom of the lake. Once he thought of it, Horn Demon spun in the water and dug up some silt and aquatic plants. As he floated up, he stuffed the greenish-black filth into his mouth. It seems to contain the heat of the magma chamber. That's the smell of the end point, but it's too dry. It's not particularly good to point up. Horn Demon tasted thought and raised his head again. The light of the shallow water spread above his head. Monkey reported at this moment, Cui Qinghe has floated up. I'm preparing to enter the water. Jingxin also said, I'll pick up Gardener. Who knows where that foul-mouthed scum is? I see him. Horn Demon glanced to the side and saw Gardener, who had sunk to the bottom of the lake, float up. The distance between the two sides gradually closed, and Gardner gave him a thumbs up. Large bubbles emerged from his mouth as if he was saying something. The corner of Horned Demon's mouth twitched, and he returned the same gesture. After a friendly greeting, the distance between the two was even closer. Gardner was indeed a powerhouse with a physical body. He was the first to emerge from the water, leaning on the shore with one elbow, and he didn't forget to reach out to pull Horned Demon. Horned Demon secretly rolled his eyes and reached out his hand. At this moment, Monkey complained, "By the way, Fatty Dragon, don't be too focused. Allocate some energy to the communication network. There's a difference in the quality of calls on the shore and in the water. There's an echo noise or something." A blank space suddenly appeared on the communication network. This blank was poisonous and it was rapidly spreading. As a result, the taste of the silt and aquatic plants in Horned Demon's mouth became extremely bitter, with a heart-palpitating almond taste. Poison. It wasn't the ingredients in his mouth, but the vicious stare of the goddess of destiny. Horned Demon abruptly withdrew his hand, but in terms of physical reaction, there was definitely a qualitative difference between him and Gardner, who came from the military. He didn't completely dodge, and the fingertips of his index and middle fingers were viciously pinched. His bones and flesh were instantly twisted and deformed. Before the pain could be transmitted back, his body was pulled up. At this moment, his right hand was almost crippled. In front of him, Gardner pushed the shore, leaned back, and slammed his heavy elbow into the connection between Horned Demon's chest and abdomen. Gastric juices, blood bubbles, and of course, the silt and aquatic plants in his mouth were instantly crushed into an indescribable dark color, spurting out from Horned Demon's mouth and nostrils. At the same time, he heard Gardner's sinister laughter. Chapter 760. Compared to the near-fatal elbow strike, Gardner's ferocious voice shook the Horned Demon's mind even more. But at the same time he heard the horse monkey's muffled groan, which then elongated into a painful scream. The scream was filled with danger, and it suddenly pulled the Horned Demon out of his trance. He didn't have the time to think about something more complicated. He chased after the sound of the horse monkey's scream, opened his mouth wide and screamed. His face, body, and even the surrounding water waves were violently distorted. The resulting impact and the psychic-piercing damage hidden deep within fused into one, and it was effectively concentrated as it blasted straight at Gardner. At the same time, an illusion was also released. It wasn't exquisite, but it was just right, turning the surrounding turbulent waters into a distorted, broken, and blurry mirror image in the blink of an eye. And before all of this happened, the Horned Demon had already silently twisted off the index and middle fingers of his right hand that Gardner had firmly clamped down on. His flesh and bones were completely severed, and he also used the chaos created by the water and sound waves to fly backward. Due to the pain from the elbow strike, the centaur instinctively bent over, and his entire body arched like a prawn. Although Gardner was blocked by his escape method and his body stagnated, he still quickly extended his arm and swung it. His fingertips brushed past the centaur's forehead, cutting through the skin and flesh, scraping the skull, and almost lifting up the top of his skull. The Horned Demon gritted his teeth, enduring the pain and dizziness, and his retreating figure suddenly deviated. It was only at this moment that Jingxin and Fatty Dragon, who were on the shore and underwater, truly reacted. The latter's reaction was even more direct. In this turbulent waters, all the fish, waterfowl, and other flesh and blood life forms exploded in an instant, forming bloody fragments that were like grenade fragments that covered a vast space with a radius of 30 meters in the blink of an eye. And the flesh and blood bombs that contained curses and wizard powers simultaneously detonated the turbulent storm in the abyss, absorbing tremendous destructive power and sweeping through everything indiscriminately. In fact, the Horned Demon, Jingxin, and the horse monkey had all received the blessings from the propping mulberry tree's branches, leaves and roots at that moment, shielding them from the blood curse's damage to the greatest extent. On the other hand, Gardner and Chui Qinghe, who had also attacked the horse monkey, had to turn back and dive deeper into the water to temporarily avoid the brunt. Even so, they were unable to completely dodge it and suffered injuries of varying degrees. Due to Fat Dragon's control of the situation, this sudden and absurd encounter finally had a rare opening. The centaur had a chance to catch his breath. Instead of retreating to the deep waters, he took the opportunity to turn to the shore, just in time to brush past the deadly Gardner and meet up with Jingxin, who had rushed over to provide support. He was saved for the time being. But at this moment, the root network of the propping mulberry tree was extremely blank. On the shore not far from the centaur, Maho's body was half in the water and half on the shore. He seemed to want to climb ashore, but his movements were stiff. His throat issued a ho-ho sound. He stretched his hand forward, but his body leaned back. By the time Jingxin rushed over from the horned demon's side and reached out to grab it, Horse Monkey had already collapsed backward. It plunged heavily into the green water and began its final convulsions. His throat had been cut in half, and the wound on his chest had penetrated all the way to his internal organs, but not a single drop of blood had gushed out. The Order of Justice's life-changing blade. Jingxin's face was gloomy. His words were like an obituary. For a B-rank ability user, knife wounds to the throat and heart might not necessarily be fatal, especially with the augmentation of the propping mulberry tree. However, with the scales of truth as its cornerstone, the law of judgment, which robbed vitality and vitality, erased all flukes and took away the life of the horse monkey. When the two systems of orders collided, the scales of truth had the upper hand at the end of the minuscule clash. The centaur opened his eyes wide. Blood flowed down his forehead, seeping into his eye sockets. He could endure such discomfort, but he could not accept this absurd situation at all. What the hell is this? The howls of the centaur had been selected by Luo Nan, and they were faithfully restored in Yin Li's perception. Of course, this also included the series of strange and unforeseen events that puzzled the centaur. Therefore, Yin Lu was much stronger than the centaur. At the very least, she could clearly understand the basic sequence of events. However, there was one crucial link. She clearly knew that it was like that, but she could not understand why it was like that. For this reason, she could not help but cast a seeking gaze at Luo Nan. Mr. Her voice was suddenly cut off. This was because Yin Lu saw Luo Nan, who was completely focused. He was staring intently at the virtual work area. His eyes did not even blink. Aside from the psychic storm diagram, there was also a configuration blueprint drawn with the terrain of the wasteland 3,000 kilometers away within the dim light of the projection area. The traces of alterations on the psychic diagram revealed a different color. And on the configuration blueprint, there was a region that flickered with light. Looking at the topographic map, it was the area of the saltwater lake where the conflict had erupted. Luo Nan seemed to have heard Yin Li's low cry at this time. His lower jaw, resting on the back of his palm, rose and fell slightly. His lips were like the cry of an ant as he muttered, "It's all working, but it's still not enough. It's not over yet." Yin Li's consciousness switched to the scene of the wasteland. By the side of the saltwater lake, ripples caused by the battle were spreading towards the center of the lake. There was still a distance from the boiling white waves. There was a muffled rumble in the relatively calm waters, and a water pillar nearly 10 meters tall exploded. At the same time, a human figure appeared from the explosion. Cui Qinghe. This ruthless swordsman, who had just killed Horse Monkey, was thrown out of the water by the shockwave from the underwater explosion. Crap. Fatty dragon. Cui Qinghe immediately came to a realization. He could not help but feel regret. Since Jingxin was on the shore after killing Horse Monkey, Cui Qinghe chose to retreat from the lake in order to save time for his breakthrough. This was also because Fatty Dragon's control spell covered the area indiscriminately. Luo Nan mistakenly believed that his most powerful enemy was already close to the shore. He never expected that this simple-minded blockhead would be waiting for him near the center of the lake. Fatty Dragon's communication network had a problem, but there was no problem at all with his own strength. Cui Qinghe took a deep breath, and his slender figure descended. The soles of his feet touched the surface of the water, but he did not sink. He was like an enormous dragonfly, stepping on the surface of the lake as if he was treading on flat ground. He was lithe and quick. This was the best technique for escaping and preserving one's life. The problem was that the water column that exploded beside Cui Qinghe, in addition to the shocking impact, every living being in it had a round of flesh and blood explosion. Under the enhancement of the spell, they formed tangible and intangible sharp thorns that shot towards him in a concentrated manner. After all, Cui Qinghe was not a real dragonfly, nor did he have the ability to fly like a bird. It was impossible for him to completely dodge them. At this moment he could no longer care about anything else. He silently called out to Priestess to help me. Relying on the subtle yet tenacious connection between him and Li Taixing, which was also built on the Scales of Truth system, he silently chanted an incantation and instantly transformed the vitality that he had just seized from the horse monkey into a life-saving defensive barrier. He also specially strengthened the special trait of curse interference. This was already the most reliable plan that Cui Qinghe could come up with in a short period of time. However, just as the parish's powers were augmented and the Scales of Truth's sacred space took form, He heard a rustling sound that resembled a tree trunk's leaves swaying. At that instant, the area where Cui Qinghe was located seemed to have moved from the surface of a surging lake to the depths of a lush forest. Through the gaps between the leaves, there was bright sunlight shining down. It was as hot as fire and as sharp as a sword. The incantation's interference barrier that Cui Qinghe had constructed melted like snow under this round of sunlight. As for his relatively stable will, it instantly wavered. Chapter 761. The conflict between them had already reached such a level? The Order of Amaterasu wanted to start an all-out war with the Order of Justice? Cui Qinghe's mind was filled with distracting thoughts, but no matter how frightened he was, sunlight seeped through the gaps between the branches and leaves. It was like thousands of sharp swords, piercing and slicing him from head to toe. It was impossible to dodge. It was only at this moment that the Order of Justice, which was constructed on top of the scales of truth, suddenly realized what was going on. It attempted to quickly rise to a higher level, but it was already too late. Cui Qinghe's physical injuries weren't actually that serious, but it was as if a nuclear bomb had been forcefully shoved into his mind. The scorching high-energy forcefully separated his soul from his physical body, roasted and melted, even quickly evaporating. During this process, the distinct fragments of Cui Qinghe's memories were also forcefully extracted, turning into intermittent spiritual waves that were rapidly transcribed, analyzed, and plunged into nothingness. On the shore, the horned demon was also struck by the astonishing changes that came from the center of the lake. It was to the extent that the bleeding wound on his severed finger was pressed into the mud. He was completely unaware of the pain and could only turn his head in shock. In reality, he could not see anything with his eyes, but his mind had already been submerged by the lingering spiritual light from the center of the lake. In a daze, he could only vaguely see a majestic divine tree that supported the heavens and the earth. The trunk was split into two, seemingly separated yet also joined. The branches and leaves were tall and lush, and a brilliant sun passed through them. It also vaguely resembled a divine bird draped in multicolored light, coiling and ascending. Such a beautiful scene pressed down on the void. It was hard to tell what was real and what was fake. However, the enormous pressure that reached the depths of his heart was real, making it hard for him to breathe. What a joke. At this moment, the horned demon had the same thoughts as the dead Cui Qinghe. No matter how one looked at it, this kind of great divine treasure-level power belonged to those at the very top of the Order of Amaterasu. No, just look at Fat Dragon who had just appeared on the surface of the lake. Based on that respectful and reverent reaction, that expression and posture, it could completely eliminate the inaccurate limitation of those at the very least. At the very least, it should be one of the two. Yes, considering the personalities of those two legendary powerhouses. Before the horned demon could come to a final conclusion, the roots and branches of the Fusang divine tree system naturally began to throb. That majestic divine tree lay across the spiritual plane. 10 suns rotated and its light shone brightly. Wherever the light shone, even the turbulent storms of the abyss trembled. The horned demon felt that it was like an ugly and mystical giant casting its furious gaze down. It did not hide at all and was even venting wantonly. After another miserable shriek, Gardner, who had dived to the bottom of the lake and escaped, exploded out of the lake like a cooked shrimp. Very soon he fell back into the water. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. On the other side of the lake there was another figure. He had already run almost 5 kilometers away, but he was also grabbed by the invisible hand. He struggled while flailing his arms and legs, but he was Hua Dian, who had been staying out of the matter and whose whereabouts were unknown. Hey. Although it was said that the Lord True God was an impulsive person that was rarely seen among extraordinaries, wasn't he a little too impulsive in this situation? Being connected to the Amaterasu cult, the centaur demon was inevitably affected. He had clearly become a slightly thicker tip in the roots of the towering divine tree. Powerful energy spread outward through him, and a large amount of information was collected through him. Obviously, the impulsive demon was particularly concerned about the matter at the saltwater lake. Was it because the church system he established was hacked? The centaur was not a fool. When things came to this point, he could also understand from Gardner and Cui Qinghe's counterattack. There was a problem with their internal communication network. Otherwise, how could Gardner accurately combine those 3 malicious keywords and send them back? However, no one had expected that the reaction of the impulsive true god would be so strong that it was beyond imagination. Before the horned demon could finish his thoughts, the impulsive demon behind the distant deep space did something even more outrageous. The sound of water suddenly stopped. The surging lake surface was suddenly suppressed by an invisible force. It was a real suppression. Whether it was the gentle waves on the shore or the boiling water in the middle of the lake that was evaporated by the heat of the lava, everything froze in an instant. The sun was shining, but it seemed like the entire lake surface was frozen. Or perhaps, it was time and space that was frozen. A buzzing sound rang out. It descended from the mental plane and crushed into the material world. The horned demon's mind shook, and his entire consciousness went blank for a long time. Oh no! Inla cried out involuntarily. The image she received suddenly distorted and turbulent, showing how difficult it was for Luo Nan to receive the information. What truly bombarded her mind was the faintly discernible shadow of the towering tree in the turbulent image. She was in Ban City and she was a member of the secret order. Of course she knew what kind of danger it represented. The majesty of the Fusang divine tree manifested itself. At the very least, one of the two extraordinaries, the Pope and the True God, had personally made a move. Inla did not dare to continue watching. She also did not want Luo Nan to be distracted and sift through the images and information for her. That was the Fusang divine tree manifesting itself. With Fatty Dragon, a high-level member of the order, the Fusang divine tree could display 50 to 60% of its power. 50 to 60% was also the power of an extraordinary. The problem was that since Luo Nan was showing it to her, it was not easy for Inlu to refuse. She had the heart to refuse, but she was worried that she would distract Luo Nan's attention. She opened her eyes to look, trembling with fear, but she saw that Luo Nan's posture was still the same. He was still sitting there. His two hands were intertwined and lightly propped against his chin. It seemed that his posture had not changed from beginning to end. The rapidly fluctuating rays of light in the virtual work area struck Luo Nan's face with a blurry color. At first glance, Luo Nan looked cloudy and clear, but his clear and tranquil eyes seemed to be able to contain and suppress all chaotic elements. It seemed that Luo Nan felt Yin Li's gaze. In the next moment, Luo Nan specifically turned his face to explain to Yin Lu, the carrier of the sensing network has been tossed and turned. Right now the visual effect isn't too good. Just bear with it for a bit. Now was not the time for idle chatter. Yin Lu really did not know what attitude she should use to face him. Right now she could roughly see that rather than bickering with Luo Nan about the focus of his attention, or trying to distinguish the violently distorted image from a distance, it would be better to look at the two drawings in the virtual work area in front of Luo Nan. This was especially true for the configuration design drawing below. The bright area related to the saltwater lake had all sorts of structural lines flickering with light. At the same time, some of them simply collapsed. Yin Li's heart endlessly contracted and expanded as the light flickered. Actually, they were already fighting. Indeed, the two were fighting far away from here. A distance of over 3,000 kilometers was not an exaggeration to say that it was the ends of the earth. But the problem was that Luo Nan was currently in Ban City. He was in the headquarters of the Amaterasu Order. Even if Ouyang Chen or Her Majesty Empress Wu personally came, they might not be able to easily escape. Relax. The current trend is very good. Luo Nan's fingers covered the corners of his lips, and an inexplicable smile appeared. He narrowed his eyes and softly calculated, 52% were discovered by touching. 21% were directly destroyed. 9% were grasped by the veins of the design. As for cracking, 1%. Chapter 762. On the top deck of the Ray, Luo Nan's posture finally changed as he sat on the bench in the sunlit area. He leaned back, his back touching the cushion. Under the illumination of the gradually slanting sun, a soft feeling started from here and gradually spread to his entire body. Phew! This long breath not only expelled the waste from his body, but it also threw away a small portion of his psychological pressure. There was a moment when Luo Nan even wanted to close his eyes and take a short nap. But in the end he locked his gaze onto the virtual work area. He let the psychic map, which was filled with danger and the unknown, give him new stimulation. Yes, it was still too early to relax. It was still too early. Mister? The current Yin Lu already didn't know how to communicate with Luo Nan. Luo Nan stared at the two maps in the work area. He searched back bit by bit from his instantly relaxed state. He found that feeling of tension and danger. During this time he didn't mind chatting with Yin Lu. If you go hunting, of course I'm not talking about the recreational type. I'm talking about the survival type. Inla couldn't grasp Luo Nan's pulse at all. She could only follow his tone and say, "Yes, I understand. It's like I'm a nomad in the wilderness. I'm going to hunt for rations for tonight and the next few days." Excellent. That's exactly what I meant. Luo Nan really liked Li's understanding of others. This saved him a lot of effort. He continued to talk about the background settings. Right now you have a few knives that aren't particularly sharp, but they can still bleed. You have quite a high level of skill in setting up traps. You've been staring at your prey for a long time. You've prepared for a long time. You know its ins and outs and its movement patterns. You have a high chance of luring it into a trap. And it doesn't know anything about you. But it's an extremely dangerous mutant. It can tear you to pieces as soon as it escapes the trap. Will you make a move under these circumstances? Inla didn't speak for a while. Her mind flashed back to the letter that she hadn't sent yet. Some of the deductions and conjectures in the letter were rapidly corroborating with reality. Perhaps she should say, "Just as I expected." It was just as she expected. Luo Nan was currently planning a hunting operation, and it could already be determined that the target that could cause Luo Nan to be cautious and hesitant right now was certainly a powerful person of the extraordinary rank. "Will you make a move?" Luo Nan asked again. "I will." Li's voice was very soft, but it was extremely bright and resolute. "I will make a move." "Oh." He's made so many preparations and spent so much time and effort. It's obvious how strong his killing intent is. Therefore, it is inevitable that we will make a move. It's just a matter of choosing the right time. Luo Nan nodded slightly. It was interesting to say things this way. He then asked, "How would you choose the right time?" The most ideal situation is, of course, to think of ways to strengthen the traps and sharpen the blades until there are no mistakes. But since it's a survival hunt, we have to consider physical strength and hunger. Also, we have to avoid bumping into another dangerous target during this period. Li's words were filled with the intention of admonishing him. Her gaze was also on the psychic diagram. Unknowingly, she had some understanding of the meaning behind the diagram. At this moment, when he looked at the 3 tornadoes that pierced through the sky and the sea, he felt his heart palpitate with fear and unease. "I'll cut the Gordian knot." "Sure," Inla spoke hurriedly. The words "temporarily detour" were stuck in her throat when she bumped into Luo Nan's sharp and penetrating gaze. She suddenly choked up, lowered her head and opened her mouth again. The meaning behind her words was completely different. If you want to make a move, the blood flame order may not be that sharp, but it can still be used by you. This isn't just my opinion. This is also the madam's opinion. Luo Nan laughed, but he didn't go any deeper into the conversation. He just waved his hand indicating that the topic was over. His figure straightened once more and he leaned forward slightly. He looked at the configuration design while paying attention to the current situation in the wasteland 3,000 kilometers away. There, the power of the Fusang divine tree was wreaking havoc. However, the focus of Luo Nan's attention was clearly diverted. From his perspective, the core of this matter had already evolved from the simple goal of finding his grandfather's laboratory to a complex experimental design. He had designed and constructed a quagmire. His original intention was to place a stink bomb, to torment those bastards who had ideas about the laboratory. However, the quagmire soon became a testing ground and it became a touchstone. The impulsive and action-oriented member of the Amaterasu order used a coordination ability that far exceeded Luo Nan's expectations. He used the most violent methods to demonstrate to Luo Nan the most likely result of a collision between the apex experts of the inner world and the configuration system. Luo Nan was very happy. As always, the configuration system displayed its powerful and reliable structure to Luo Nan. And this time was clearly different from the examples he had tested back and forth in recent times. It was infinitely close to actual combat. It was the closest to Luo Nan's future practical application. This was an excellent standard of reference. The Fusang divine tree had manifested its divine might, the will of the Pope or a true God had descended, but the true body had yet to arrive. Basically, it was equivalent to the out-of-body state of a mental type extraordinary. Yes, there was also the level of strength after the fleshly body suffered heavy injuries. Luo Nan could see that the configuration module in the saltwater lake region was rapidly collapsing, and the speed of the collapse was growing faster and faster. Luo Nan looked at the time. Over 200 seconds had passed since the enemy arrived with monstrous hostility to carry out a destructive search and trace back the hidden veins. Even if he chopped it down in half, he would still have plenty of time. Of course, the situation was different when one attacked from the outside and when one struggled from the inside. At the same time, one had to consider that the venting was destruction. The power that erupted from the struggle for life would be vastly different. There was one more thing. Luonan looked at the reactions of the others. It seemed that all of them were focused on the matter of the Fusang Divine Tree system being blackened. They didn't pay too much attention to whether or not Gardner and Cui Qinghe's intense reactions were appropriate. Did they feel that the changes in people's emotions were unreasonable? But Cui Qinghe's soul had been forcefully stripped away and analyzed in a destructive manner. Did they not discover any problems during this process? Luonan himself was a bit shocked. His thoughts penetrated deep into space. Through the channels of the Wraith sign in the polar domain, he peered into the abyssal sun wheel and experienced the state of the Wraith sign itself. Ever since he discovered the source of the Wraith sign's power, the Wraith sign seemed to have unwittingly leaped to another level. It had an even stronger and more secretive effect on the emotions of the human heart. Even extraordinaries were unable to detect the Wraith sign in their urgency. Luonan just didn't know what the effect was on extraordinaries themselves. Especially extraordinaries in their spirit-body state. Luonan was busy making comparisons and deductions. It didn't matter to him who the powerful person controlling the Fusang Divine Tree system was. In any case, it was just a symbol for reference and comparison. However, the big shot in front of him had repeatedly probed, bombarded, and destroyed. He had even swept through the entire saltwater lake. Yet he still didn't have an acceptable result. His emotions had truly exploded on the spot. He projected his power without regard for the consequences or the cost. Chapter 763. The centaur was probably the unluckiest one. As a psychic, his perception was finer and more sensitive than the other two. There were some information that he couldn't block even if he wanted to. In a trance, he was guided by the power of Fusang Divine Tree. He penetrated the water body, the rock layer, the mud, and the magma chamber. After repeated interference collisions, he even vaguely encountered some strange structures. The centaur could feel that the true god was gradually paying more attention to these strange structures. He kept scanning and analyzing them, but these structures themselves had been integrated into the material structure of the water body and rock layer. There was even a part that seemed to be closer to the changing spacetime itself. The centaur was far from being able to experience the specific spacetime structure. It was only under the influence of the Fusang Divine Tree system that he came into contact with some content beyond the scope. This was barely a good thing. It broadened his horizons and deepened his level. It was also beneficial for his future training. The premise was that he could struggle to survive today's terrible situation. The centaur's pessimistic expectations came from the true god's poor progress and his increasingly restless emotions. From his point of view, the true god's searching and scanning work seemed a little crude. At least, compared to the delicate structure that was engraved on the mud, rocks, water, and even the changes of time and space, it was too crude. The physical accuracy of these structures was actually very average. Perhaps they were scratches on the rocks or obvious deep trenches in the mud layer. Many of them were visible to the naked eye. But once it involved the whole, the connection between them became unconstrained and unpredictable. The basic strokes of the meaningful structure might have brushed past the rock, and the next stroke might have connected to the bottom of the silt layer, and the next stroke might have even been a strand of rippling water. It might have seemed like a random drawing and was filled with absurd coincidences, but they were meaningful on a deeper and broader level. At least from the results of the current detection, they were meaningful. The problem was that the true god always brushed past these meaningful structures. He could sense it, but it was often only after he destroyed the carrier of the structure and sensed the special resistance that he suddenly realized it. When he wanted to go back to study, it was already a mess and beyond recognition. It was easier said than done to restore it. Over and over again, not to mention the true god himself, even the centaur from the perspective of half a passerby would explode after following a few times. By the time the saltwater lake was destroyed 7 to 8 times by the true god's powerful power, all traces were completely annihilated. Unless a true god had the ability to turn back time, the only way to find the ultimate mystery was in a dream. It was not easy to admit this fact. At the very least, that was the case for a true god. From the vibrations transmitted by the Fusang Divine Tree system, that person's emotions had probably exploded for the second time. It carried an intense unwillingness and wanted to make a final struggle. Therefore, he expanded the range of his senses and the coverage area of the Fusang Divine Tree's power system. With the saltwater lake as the center, His search radius expanded to 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers. As the fulcrum of the system, Minotaur and the other two became the relay station for the transmission of spirit waves. A vast power that didn't belong to them rushed through their body and soul structures. The heat was so strong that it could almost melt their cultivation bases. Minotaur was really afraid. Although he was also considered a believer under the Amaterasu Church's wings, his faith was inferior to that of an old fox like Jingxin, much less fat dragon. It was completely a combination of benefits. The Amaterasu Church didn't care about this. It wasn't that they were tolerant and magnanimous, but that once the true God, who was used to raging impulsively, started killing, shallow believers like Minotaur might be eliminated like ants. In the past, Minotaur only treated such rumors as a joke, but now he felt that this danger was approaching. Minotaur turned his gaze with great difficulty and swept it across Jingxin. That guy didn't care about the mud beneath him at all. He was already lying on the ground and didn't move at all to show his reverence and the fear of facing the terrible unknown. What the F***ck? Who the hell is this? Since they have such divine powers that can turn invisible, they still use such means to tease us? Or could it be some great enemy of the church who had deliberately lured a true God over to make things difficult for him? No matter how he thought about it, there was always a link in the chain of logic that couldn't be connected. It felt terrible. I can actually use my brain to think about something else? Minotaur sensitively sensed that the pressure of power projected by the Fusang divine tree system had decreased. Is it because the true God's impulsive emotions have begun to fade? At this moment, a rumbling sound came from a certain direction. At first, it sounded like thunder, but Minotaur quickly distinguished that it was a low-flying jet. He subconsciously looked up and quickly captured a tiny silhouette passing under the clouds. It's a plane. It should be a medium-sized transport. Why does it look familiar? Why does this look like the one I forcibly hijacked when I flew from Huqing? After 6 hours, the transport plane swaggered back and began to hover over the saltwater lake. Does the pilot of the transport plane have any unusual expectations for Fiery Bird? When the centaur had similar malicious thoughts in his mind, thanks to the Fusang divine tree system, his sharp senses accurately captured that the cabin door of the cargo plane in the sky opened, and a figure jumped out of it. Just like what Minotaur did 6 hours ago, but this time there was no help from the sharp-beaked pterodactyl. The figure didn't wear an umbrella, personal aircraft, or other auxiliary equipment. He just jumped down with his bare hands and fell like a stone. Is he going to dump the body? Before he finished his thoughts, the falling figure had already fallen more than half of the height. He had already reached the airspace only a few hundred meters from the surface of the saltwater lake. Without any reason, the falling momentum suddenly slowed down. The change was so drastic that the Minotaur on the ground was shocked. The fatal acceleration of gravity was almost completely applied to the person, causing his limbs to be greatly distorted and squirmed. The vision of a B-level ability user could already distinguish the figure and facial contours of a person. In the eyes of Minotaur, the guy was wearing an anti-tank suit, and the face was vaguely familiar. Yes, it was the co-pilot that Minotaur had seen on the transport plane. But this face only stayed in Minotaur's eyes for a second or two. The facial features formed by the high-speed squirming facial muscles and partial bone deformation had turned into a person he was more familiar with, Luo Yuan. Boom. After a miraculous mid-air buffer, the silhouette resumed its free fall. In the blink of an eye, it smashed heavily onto the surface of the lake near the shore. Splashes of water and mud splattered everywhere, comparable to exploding shrapnel. Chapter 764. A True God. Luo Yuan? On the North Mountain Lake in Ban City, Yinlu finally confirmed the identity of the Amaterasu cult's expert. At the same time, she was shocked by the one who had just landed in the wilderness. For most people in the inner world, Luo Yuan hadn't been in their sights for a long time. What truly left a deep impression was the attempted assassination of Ouyang Chen and Luo Nan in Xia City. That happened exactly half a year ago. Yinlu turned her head to look at Luo Nan's reaction. Sure enough, Luo Nan frowned. What did he come here for? We need to retract the induction network. The already distorted image of the wasteland in front of Yinlu instantly zoomed out and became even more blurry. It felt like he had returned from the panoramic virtual reality to a traditional video. This was undoubtedly Luo Nan's initiative. It showed how much Luo Nan valued and feared this person. Yinlu was unable to pick and choose. She could only follow Luo Nan's gaze and size up Luo Yuan from afar. To be honest, one couldn't see much from a distance. One could only see that this person kept smiling. His smile lines formed clear lines of muscles and showed a serious color. Together, they formed a unique emotional tension. However, Luo Nan's gaze quickly shifted away from Luo Yuan. His focus was mostly on Minotaur, Jingxin, and Fat Dragon, greatly deviating from the focus of the matter. It could be said to be a mediocre director's technique, making Yin Lu, a spectator, rather uncomfortable. Well, Luo Nan's train of thought was the most difficult to adapt to. This sort of clairvoyance through a traditional lens was the embodiment of Luo Nan's focus and direction of thought. It was truly different from ordinary people. Luckily, Luo Nan didn't forget his responsibility of broadcasting. He explained a bit to Yin Lu, "I've been monitoring this fellow quite often recently. He's very sensitive, so I need to change my usual methods. Also, I'll do another experiment." By the way, Yin Lu would rather not hear this explanation. Compared to the little struggle in Yin Li's heart, the Minotaur who didn't know that he had become someone's focus was really in a dilemma. The one who fell from the sky crashed into the lake and greeted him as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he slowly walked to the shore. As the distance approached, the centaur could clearly hear the sound of bones and muscles twisting and tearing. The damage from falling from a high altitude was real. But amidst this cacophony, there was clearly a rather harmonious sound that represented the traces of controllable power. It was precisely this power that gathered the body of the co-pilot that should have turned into a pile of flesh and blood, temporarily turning him into another person. Fan Lu had mentioned that the two transport pilots were both products of the gene exchange. They were clones created from genes and asexual reproduction. It was also the carrier of Luo Yuan's power. Luo Yuan did not establish a religious system such as the Fusang Divine Tree or the Scales of Truth, but through those products, his power and consciousness could still be projected to every corner of Earth. Seeing this person here and now, Horned Demon felt uneasy. In fact, after Luo Yuan set foot on the shore of the lake, he stared at the centaur for a long time. Not only his sight, but the centaur's super-perception that was enhanced by the Fusang Divine Tree system could also clearly feel that above the chaotic and turbulent abyss area, in the deep polar region that was even harder to detect, there was a deadly cannon that silently adjusted its direction and pointed straight at them. I won't be treated like Ouyang Chen, right? If Luo Nan can do it, then so can I. Pooh. Horned Demon's mind was a bit chaotic. Exploring the polar region, he directly felt that Luo Yuan was the ultimate weapon that intimidated all powers and won the respect of the masses. This was an achievement worthy of commemoration, but it was also an even crueler test. After all, this was the planar crossbow. This was a nickname that came from Xia City and it was quite famous. It was also under the intimidation of this ultimate weapon that the restless true god temporarily recovered his calm. Fat Dragon, who had experienced a fierce battle in the lake water, slowly walked ashore. His originally stiff pupils radiated a divine light that was as brilliant as the morning sun. Soul possession. Past. Luo Nan quickly eliminated a certain possibility from the yacht. Yin Lu felt quite subtle. Whether it was Luo Nan, Luo Yuan, or True God, all three of them used inconceivable methods to project their own power and consciousness thousands of kilometers away. Their methods of projection were different. No matter which one it was enough to make one feel odd. But in the current situation, why did she feel that Luo Nan was the one who held the upper hand? He maintained a hidden and transcendent state. It was something that True God and Luo Yuan could not discover, and it was hard for them to reach. Yes, you can't compare it like this. Yin Lu was a little scared by her own thoughts. She instinctively shook her head. Luo Yuan also found the right target for conversation. He greeted the special existence that was in the form of Fat Dragon, but in reality he was a true god for the second time. Lord True God, your temper is still so irritable. The laboratory isn't that important. Why do you need to get angry? It wasn't because of the matter with the laboratory. Luo Yuan's words were too matter-of-fact. Horned Demon and Jingxin really wanted to correct him. But the True God, who was the most impulsive, didn't express anything. Moreover, the restlessness that pervaded the Fusang Divine Tree system continued to fall. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of Luo Yuan's planar crossbow, or perhaps he didn't want to let this powerful person of the same level laugh at him. The True God tacitly agreed to this matter. Fat Dragon obeyed his will and spoke in a low voice. What are your plans for coming here? I'm an outsider. I came here because I was entrusted by someone. If I really want to talk about my plans. Some people want to make money without knowing their intentions, but they have shamefully failed. I came here to watch a joke. As he spoke, He hooked his finger at Horn Demon, who was still half submerged in the water. His smile remained unchanged, but it made Horn Demon's heart suddenly twitch. Horn Demon subconsciously looked at Fat Dragon, but the latter didn't express anything. An ominous premonition lingered in his heart, but Horn Demon couldn't refuse. He didn't even have the confidence to put on his usual crazy appearance. He could only take a deep breath, slowly climb ashore and drag his way over. The distance between the two wasn't long, so they quickly approached each other. It's worth the ticket to watch you make a fool of yourself. I shouldn't be fussing with you. However, your employer is very dissatisfied with your stupid appearance, and Toyama Auction House has been pressuring you. Speaking of which, you should know what the stupidest thing is, right? Luo Yuan's tone was relaxed, without any feeling of reprimand. The corners of Horn Demon's eyes twitched slightly, and the bad feeling continued to worsen. According to his temper, he wouldn't answer such a question, but now he unconsciously made a stupid response. It's spreading news about Wu Jun? You actually know. Nonsense, of course Horn Demon knew. Actually, it didn't matter how big of a commotion he caused in the wasteland. The manipulator behind the scenes and the Toyama Auction House had the ability to limit the negative effects to a certain range. Only spreading the news about Wu Jun and Luo Yuandao's laboratory was tantamount to smashing the auction house's pot. It made the value of a unique auction item instantly drop by half, or maybe even more. More importantly, once the news reached Luo Nan's ears and reached Xia City, it would be hard for them to pinch Luo Nan if they were to find him first. The treat plan would be in danger of being stillborn. Horn Demon knew this clearly, but he never cared. He had this kind of temperament and character. However, at this moment, he began to feel weak when facing Luo Yuan's smiling face that remained grave and stern. Luo Yuan didn't give him a chance to be at a loss. He reached out and patted Horn Demon's right shoulder. His tone seemed to be sighing. A woman marrying more than one person hurts her character. She might give birth to a son without an asshole. You might not be able to live until then, so it probably doesn't matter. But right now you need to learn a lesson. At the very least, you need to let the stakeholders vent their anger. Horn Demon's pupils contracted. His body tensed up instinctively, but it was useless. He didn't even have time to react before his right arm was in severe pain. 2 of his fingers had already been torn off. Luo Yuan grabbed his arm and forcefully tore it off from his shoulder. A blood-curdling scream rang out, but under the control of Horn Demon's instinctive suppression, it turned into a roar that rolled in his throat. Horn Demon's figure fell down. His limb was torn off and he was bleeding profusely. The corresponding psychological trauma nearly made him kneel on the ground. But in the end he managed to stand up with difficulty. He just bent his waist, barely maintaining his trembling body. His mouth oozed bloody saliva, and his eyes sprayed poisonous flames. He stared fixedly at the muddy shore of the lake. It was as if his mortal enemy was hidden in the ditch there. At this moment, whether it was on this side of the wasteland or the distant North Mountain Lake of Ban City, the air froze. Only Luo Yuan's hoarse voice echoed, "I hope you can accept and understand this punishment. To tell you the truth, as a former employee of the laboratory, I chose a slightly more severe method. I feel much more comfortable now." Horn Demon's body just trembled. He didn't say a word. In fact, even he was surprised that he was able to keep his mind clear, calm, and restrained. He wasn't the only one who was surprised. Lu heard a low cry beside her, and there were some words. She didn't hear it clearly due to the excessive vagueness. When she looked back, she only saw Luo Nan's lips slightly open and close. She was unable to distinguish it. But at this time, Luo Nan's lens was firmly locked onto Horn Demon's body. Luo Yuan held the severed arm that once belonged to Horn Demon in his hand. The severed limb was still twitching. He raised his eyebrows and placed the torn wound before his eyes. He sized it up seriously. "The activity of the nerve cells is much better than I imagined. The repairability isn't bad either. Look, the bleeding has stopped. Your gene modulation last time wasn't completely useless. You can do a local proliferation repair later. You'll pay the cost yourself." He threw the severed arm into the mud after saying this. "Okay, I finished dealing with this matter. Let's hurry up with the laboratory." He turned to Fatty Dragon. His unchanging smile matched with his eyes, indicating for Fatty Dragon to look up. At this time, the medium-sized transport plane that carried Luo Yuan over had already deviated from the sky above Saltwater Lake. It flew northwest. It was unknown when, but it pulled up colorful smoke in the air, afraid that others wouldn't be able to see it. Just when everyone's gazes were focused, something was thrown down from the transport plane. Of course, it wasn't a person this time. It was a beacon that pulled up colorful smoke. Chapter 765. When Luo Yuan's suggestion was implemented, the people who were still alive on the side of the saltwater lake were already in the off-road vehicle on the lake shore, speeding towards the beacon location of the colorful smoke pillar. The atmosphere in the car was very strange. The off-road vehicle itself was Gardner's legacy. Even if the man who was suspected to be a military spy was still breathing when the true god descended, he was already dead after being sifted through 7 or 8 times in the saltwater lake. Without the original owner, the authority of the off-road vehicle almost became a problem. Fortunately, Luo Yuan carried a new generation of dynamo core that was said to be used for internal testing. In addition to being able to be implanted into the human body, this thing seemed to be a natural enemy of intelligent systems. Luo Yuan used it to hack the control system of the off-road vehicle. Although some functions involving the military's remote control authority were restricted, basic driving was not a problem. Luo Yuan also sat in the driver's seat. The front passenger seat was given to the largest fat dragon, and 3 people were squeezed in the back seat. Jingxin, who pretended to be mute, the centaur with a broken arm, and Huadian, who was lucky enough to survive. Jingxin's talkative attribute disappeared the moment the true god's will descended. He was now a good dog, obedient wherever the will of the true god descended. The centaur's state was a bit more complicated. He found the medical box from the off-road vehicle and was bandaging the broken arm. However, he looked at his hand movements. His thoughts drifted to somewhere else and his eyes were uncertain. As for Huadian, as a commercial employee, he didn't have an obvious position. When Fat Dragon and others' internal communication network was hacked and information was leaked, his first reaction was to stay away from the matter. Although he didn't run away in the end, he avoided the direct impact of the true god's wrath and survived. However, he was swept by the power of the Fusang divine tree and was inexplicably stuffed into the car. He was also listless. He wanted to pretend to be a dead dog, but he couldn't hide the nervousness in his heart. At this time, Luo Yuan used his hoarse voice to pacify the whistling dry wind. Everyone relax. Visiting Luo Yuandao's laboratory, appraising, playing some dirty tricks and doing some experiments, isn't that your goal? This goal will soon be achieved, so you should be happy. He smiled and turned his head to look at Fat Dragon's stiff face. Don't think that I'm joking. It's just that some people can't stand your torment. As an outsider, the reason why I'm here is because I've been entrusted by someone. Let's not talk about the distant matters, but at the very least, I have to make sure that the Toyama auction house is all right. Speaking of which, you're considered a major shareholder. Fatty Dragon glanced over, his eyes glowing like the sun, and the pressure on the spiritual plane was as strong as a storm. However, Luo Yuan didn't care at all. The centaur can come over and everyone has already turned a blind eye to it. But with such a big movement, the auction item that was won with great difficulty may not be sold. At that time, Lord True God, I'm afraid that your Pope Father won't look too good either. Before Luo Yuan could finish his sentence, Horned Demon, Jingxin, and Huadian, who were at the back, lowered their heads at the same time regardless of their physical or mental state. They really treated them as 3 dead dogs, yearning to spit out their tongues and die to prove their innocence. The relationship between the 2 extraordinaries, the true god of the Amaterasu cult and the Pope, as well as the story of how the Amaterasu cult started, was more or less a taboo in the inner world. The son was a true god and the father was the Pope. Such a strange configuration of the upper echelons almost confirmed the nature of the Amaterasu cult as a grassroots cult before its rise. Some things could be said in private, but it would blow up if it was said in person. Horned Demon and the others seemed to be able to hear the groan of the off-road vehicle under them on the verge of collapse. But in the end, the off-road vehicle still arrived near the beacon thrown by the transport vehicle in relatively good condition. Just as the vehicle arrived, 2 figures appeared on the horizon of the wasteland. The distance and direction were different, but their unhurried pace was similar. It felt like they were calmer than the group of people who came by car. Anthony and Vanta. They've been nearby for a long time. The will of the true god in Fatty Dragon's body made a direct judgment. Everyone who comes is a guest. Don't you also wish for more visitors? Luo Yuan waved at the 2 in a friendly manner, then jumped out of the car. The light in Fatty Dragon's eyes swept over the 2 people. The aura on Anthony's body flowed sluggishly like liquid mercury. It was obvious that he had endured a power that far exceeded the limits of his body and soul structure. This was what it looked like when a mortal used divine methods. As for Vanta, from the true god's point of view, Vanta's consciousness was completely sealed in the fortress built of a physical body. Apart from some fluctuations that radiated, there were no other traces. Even with the power of the Fusang Divine Tree System, it was impossible to determine the truth in a short period of time. However, this action, at the level of an ability user, was probably equivalent to an ordinary person blocking their mouth and nose to hold their breath, but he could actually hold it. He was quite a strange fellow. At this moment, Luo Yuan clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention. It was almost exactly the same as what Horn Demon had done a few hours ago. Jing Xin subconsciously glanced at Horn Demon, but the latter was in a daze and did not seem to notice. I know that everyone is here for Luo Yuandao's laboratory. Now that everyone has been gathered here, I want to save some time and the negative impact it will bring. To put it simply, if there's anything, go to the laboratory to solve it. Don't mess around outside. The people who came with the off-road vehicle already knew the ins and outs of the matter. Anthony and Vanta could not hide their puzzlement. They did not know why Luo Yuan jumped out. Luo Yuan did not explain further. He quickly cut to the point. Due to the characteristics of the laboratory entrance's irregular movement, almost no one can lock onto the area where the entrance is located over a long period of time. Except for Wu Jun. The few people from the Amaterasu parish added in their hearts. However, Horn Demon had some luck. Of course, there is also the surprising greed of a certain parish. He locked onto this relatively narrow area with relative accuracy. In this way, for a former laboratory employee like me, finding the entrance is more or less up to the task. The smile on Luo Yuan's face seemed to become deeper. When we were maintaining the anchoring device back then, we often used this matter as a bet. Of course, we must first eliminate senior sister Qingwen, otherwise there is no way to play. Come on, the top auction item worth 100 billion, the future hot research base, and of course the Holy Land for writing papers, Format 70 Research Institute. Welcome everyone. Following his voice, a mechanical squeaking sound came from the ground under everyone's feet. At Luo Yuan's feet, a part of the red soil sank, revealing a rather deep hole. Chapter 766. There were no natural anomalies, nor were there any lighting effects. It was just a bare cave with a series of creaking sounds on the uneven red soil. There was a flight of stairs at the bottom. This setup was barely passable as the entrance to a secret laboratory in the wilderness, but it was far from what everyone had been imagining and trying to figure out for a period of time. There's no need to be suspicious. It's here. Everyone just come to the front. The 7 people present gathered together. The participants of the transaction in front of this door maintained their original state of mind. Most of them maintained an intense and urgent interest in the laboratory. However, they were more or less stunned when they saw this scene. This is Bo Qingwen's design. It is said that the structure of the door is based on solid rock. There are requirements for the environmental structure, so no matter where it is moved, it must touch the ground. This design is quite basic. It doesn't rely on instruments to complete it. Therefore, the people from the Toyama auction house couldn't do anything about it when they dismantled the anchoring device. Of course, in order to avoid moving it into the water, opening it at the bottom of the lake and causing water to flow in, the anchoring device was designed to avoid danger. Fortunately, the saltwater lake you guys are in doesn't have this thing. Otherwise, you would have to struggle with the water first. Fatty Dragon occupied the largest area in front of the cave. The will of the true god attached to Fatty Dragon scanned the ordinary door on the ground a few dozen times. It muttered to itself for a moment before turning its gaze to the Horn Demon. Among everyone present, only the Horn Demon had truly been to Luo Yuandao's laboratory, aside from Luo Yuan. Of course he could provide proof. The Horn Demon's consciousness entered a half-dazed state. He didn't even pay much attention to the true god's gaze. Instead, he slowly bent his knees and half-knelt on the ground. He used his only left hand to dig at the red earth at the edge of the cave. Not only did he dig out the red earth granules, but he also dug out the rock fragments below. Then he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed and tasted it. Only now did he speak vaguely to Fatty Dragon. Every time I see it, I feel that it's inconceivable. This taste. This fellow really is a madman. Yin Lu evaluated in a low voice on the yacht on Beishan Lake. She turned her head as she spoke, wanting to find some sense of approval with Luo Nan. But at this moment, she saw the youth beside her squint his eyes. His lips and tongue were slightly licking and biting. There was clearly nothing there, but it seemed like he was tasting some special dish. Inlu was horrified. That was tasting dirt. Aside from the fact that there was no sand in his mouth, all of Luonan's facial expressions and movements were nearly 100% synchronized with the horned demon that was over 3,000 kilometers away. Oh, there was also a sparkling luster at the corner of her eyes. Lu was at a complete loss for a time when faced with Luonan's bizarre state. He wanted to break the ice, but he didn't have the courage to do so. His entire body froze in place. After a few seconds, the young man beside him let out a sigh of relief and removed the strange state on his own. No wonder I couldn't find it. I've overlooked too many structural details. It turns out that it's been reassembled and connected. I've been too naive, first sir? Oh, it's okay. One of my doubts has been resolved, and I've found some very good teaching materials. Luonan turned his face to reveal an extraordinarily brilliant smile. With that said, he erased the useless configuration blueprints and compared them to the current location of Luo Yuan and the others. He reconstructed the terrain and the door that had just opened. Previously, Luonan didn't understand why he could use himself as the starting point to set up the large coordinate system. He had a deep perception of the curvature of spacetime and its structure. He was able to capture the intersection point between planes like the cloud world and the deep blue world and the local spacetime. He just couldn't find any traces of his grandfather's laboratory in this wasteland. Now, with his mother's work, he had reconstructed the spacetime interference structure. Everything became a matter of course. Luonan liked this answer very much. He liked it very much. Luonan's state became even more relaxed under his great mood. Even though he was using his heart to reproduce the relevant configuration blueprints, he still remembered to give Lu a reminder. I'm not clear about the specific environment of the laboratory. For the sake of caution, the view will be narrower. I basically don't need to filter anything anymore. Huh? Before Lu could understand what was going on, the group of people in the wasteland followed Luo Yuan's lead. They followed the stairs down the cave and entered one by one. Lu looked from Luo Yuan to Jingxin, who entered last. There was no one left at the cave entrance, but the corresponding lens didn't change from beginning to end. Just as she was puzzled, the lens finally changed. The change was very abrupt. The light suddenly dimmed and the space felt cramped. When it became clear again, all she saw was a wall of flesh in front of her. It was Fatty Dragon, the carrier of a true god soul possession. How could it be so close? And this perspective, Li's heart raced. Her mind quickly recalled the sequence of people entering the laboratory one after another. The first was Luo Yuan. The second was Fatty Dragon. The third was the Horned Demon. That's right. According to the sequence, the Horned Demon went down right next to Fatty Dragon. This position and height were very close. Thinking back to the synchronized reactions of Luonan and the Horned Demon, Lu finally connected the logical chain. This was also a soul possession. How did Luonan do it? While she was in a trance, the group of people had already passed through the underground passage and entered a relatively spacious area. According to Luo Yuan, this was the most spacious place in the entire laboratory. People adjusted their positions here and looked around. Luo Yuan continued to introduce, the structure of the laboratory is very simple. Actually, apart from a very small number of people, experiments can't be done here. It's more like an observation point. Right now, all the facilities and equipment here have been moved away. Even the observation itself has become a problem. But I think this shouldn't be a problem for everyone here. The Horned Demon. It was unknown whether or not the Horned Demon was completely under Luonan's control, but it turned its head to observe. Lu was able to confirm that they were in a semicircular space. It was completely empty. All that was left were the messy instrument tables and some of the severed wires. The demolition work of the Toyama auction house was done very well. Right now, the only eye-catching thing here was the curved surface in front of them. It was similar to the arrangement of a ship's porthole. The curved surface was a whole piece of transparent interface. At the very least, it should have been transparent at first. It was just that it was gray and dirty, completely obscuring one's vision. Even if it wasn't obscured, one could still see it in this underground space. Oh, was it a misconception? Why did she feel that there really seemed to be a depth behind the gray and dirty mirror surface in front of her? Moreover, it was shaking and swaying violently. It was like a sandstorm between the portholes, covering the entire area of vision. This was because the sandstorm was airtight. It was like a thick rock layer that completely buried the porthole interface. Was this an underground sandstorm? What was this? Chapter 767. The observation point that Luo Yuan mentioned wasn't big. With Fat Dragon's massive physique, it only took 2 steps to arrive behind the circular observation window. Following that, he reached out his hand and touched the inner layer of the window. He was also sensing the details of the collision between the window and the sandstorm outside. A great spectacle. The will of the true God whose soul was attached to Fat Dragon described it this way. He rarely used the word great, but at this moment, it wasn't easy to find a word that was more in line with reality and his state of mind. Lord True God should have seen it before. Horned Demon once visited this place. Back then, it was a better observation opportunity. He's not a good carrier. Under the propping mulberry tree system, the meaning of this sentence was equivalent to he's not a good believer. On the other side, Jingxin's heart instinctively twitched when he heard this. He subconsciously lowered his head, afraid that the true God would comment on him. However, as the person in question, Horned Demon only stared intently at the observation window. He looked at the thick sandstorm outside with amazement at his level of concentration. The true God's attention was still focused on the sandstorm outside the observation window, so he didn't care about Horned Demon's reaction. He used Fat Dragon's thick fingers to slowly rub against the windshield, feeling the details of the collision between the inside and the outside. At the same time, he said in an especially gentle tone, "Those sand-like fragments have spatial textures. Those sand-like fragments have the texture of space. We don't necessarily understand what space is, but we give it this definition. At the very least, it's an approximation. It makes people feel that if these fragments are pieced together, they will form an additional dimension that can accommodate us." Luo Yuan clapped, as expected of Lord True God. "You sound like you're preaching." "I'm just deliberately mystifying things. If I really knew the truth behind it, why would I need to say so much nonsense?" The true God's attitude was very frank. In front of the mystery that seemed to be within reach, his reputation wasn't that important. He continued to rub the window. It was shaped like a windshield and it did block the sandstorm outside. However, behind the seemingly simple phenomenon, there was a deep and complicated mechanism. If it's just an ordinary windshield including this laboratory and if it's just an ordinary underground building, then nothing will be left behind under the erosion of the sandstorm outside. Such craftsmanship is rare in the world, right? In fact, it's unique. Luo Yuan also walked to the observation window and stood side by side with Fatty Dragon. Ignoring the difference in size, the two people's auras were equally matched. He calmly explained, "Luo Yuandao and his son, along with Bo Qingwen, they slowly constructed this laboratory in the sandstorm that we are currently witnessing. They continuously pushed deeper into the sandstorm. In fact, the main task of constructing and pushing forward was all done by Bo Qingwen. In this field, her talent was displayed without restraint, especially in the middle and late stages. She made progress almost every day and every 2 or 3 weeks she would have a new discovery." Luo Yuandao, on the other hand, shifted his research field to the practical application of formatting theory. Luo Zhongheng was the most active experimental subject. He could always digest the new results of Luo Yuandao and Bo Qingwen. At that time, everything seemed to be going well until one day an unforeseen event occurred and the process was interrupted. Weight structure? What are they using? Materials? Technology? The true God grasped a key word. About that. Luo Yuan stomped his feet, letting everyone present feel the physical nature of the laboratory. The place we are in seems to be the product of hollowing out the rock strata. In the first 2 years that I came here, I always thought that it was like this. But in fact, this place is pieced together using building blocks. Oh, the true God also said this word. It's really amazing. As for the raw materials, it is said to be those. Luo Yuan pointed outside the observation window. There was only one thing there, and that was the sandstorm that was so dense that it could no longer be distinguished from the static state. Every fragment is a building block with a specific shape and nature. Although we don't know why they are broken and how they are restored with such rich materials, it is still possible to pick apart from them and redesign a small room in your heart. These are Bo Qingwen's original words. Fatty Dragon turned his head and stared blankly at the silent roaring sandstorm outside the window. The others were similar. After knowing the premise, the originally cramped laboratory gave people a completely different feeling. Even if they were here in person, it was hard for them to imagine how Bo Qingwen had pieced together the sand and dust into a building of this scale using the method of building blocks. After so many years, I have returned to the old place. I am also very surprised that it can still maintain its general appearance. Luo Yuan smiled and looked up. No one knew what he was looking at. At the end of his line of sight, there was nothing but the ceiling. Bo Qingwen. Fatty Dragon said this name, which was equivalent to the will of the true God giving extra attention. It sounds like an excellent woman. Why isn't she famous? If even the true God can't really understand her genius in technology, how can you count on those ordinary people? Of course, she is also an excellent architect. Even in the wilderness, her light will shine sooner or later. However, the bad luck of the Luo family infected her, and of course that bastard. At this moment, no one could see Luo Yuan's expression, but even the true God attached to Fatty Dragon could not continue the conversation for a while. In the end, Luo Yuan turned his face again, still with the same smiling expression. Okay, let's not talk about unpleasant things. Everyone has paid a great price to get the opportunity to visit, study, and inspect the goods. I hope that you won't cause trouble or even lose your life because of some low-level mistakes, at least in the eyes of former employees like me. So, please allow me to talk about some taboos in the laboratory. At this point, Luo Yuan turned his head to look at the centaur and asked, "You are also a person who has been tossing around here. Have you told everyone?" The centaur glanced at him and ignored him. Luo Yuan was not angry. "Then I'll explain it from the beginning. It's not particularly complicated. There are only 3 basic principles. First, I believe that you all know very well that the sandstorm outside the observation window is not a real sandstorm. Any contact with it that you think is infallible will lead to fatal consequences. Second, don't leave the scope of space you can understand. I mean, this laboratory is your shelter. Only here can you observe this sandstorm more leisurely, and at the same time, you don't have to worry about your own survival. Well, we have been bored here for too long. We might as well go to other areas of the laboratory to recognize the way and identify the safe zone." Luo Yuan left the observation point first, leading a group of people through the corridor of the laboratory, introducing the rooms on both sides. The main structure of the laboratory is like a crab, with a wide and hard carapace and 2 pairs of strong chelicerae stretching out. Its upper body is protruding forward, exposed to this sandstorm, and the back is still attached to the space we are familiar with. Basically, the head and chelicerae are very strong. At least when I am here, I can listen to the sandstorm and the special interference sound of the laboratory and have a good dream. You have seen the laboratory. The circular corridor we are walking in is the chelicerae on one side. We call it the left chelicerae corridor, and the symmetrical side is naturally the right chelicerae corridor. Note that they look like a ring, but they are not connected. There is a room at the end, and if you want to die, you can go in. Here we are. In front of the place where Luo Yuan stopped, there was a seemingly very thick metal door, equipped with a turntable lock similar to that of a traditional vault, highlighting the cautious mentality of the designer. Well, this set of safety doors was installed after Bo Qingwen's death, because without her, the follow-up project was aborted. Before this was actually a place to show off their affection. Luo Yuan's words became strange, and he had no intention of opening the door. However, with the sensing ability of a true god, a mere metal door could not stop him. After a little sensing, he understood. Indeed, the spacetime structure is very unstable, and it was basically eroded and destroyed by the sandstorm. This door is actually meaningless, and it mainly relies on a splicing structure similar to the observation point. Is the other side of the corridor the same configuration? Yes, originally, Bo Qingwen wanted to make a vehicle that could move freely in this sandstorm, and called it the tree hole plan. At the end of the 2 corridors is actually the vehicle parking station. She and Luo Zhongheng each presided over one, and they started work at the same time to compare with each other. But in the end, only a small part of the work was completed and misfortune came. Luo Yuan turned back. The observation center, the left and right corridors, and the rooms on both sides are basically the scope of the safe zone. At least it was very safe before. After dismantling so many pieces of equipment, there must be some holes, right? Luo Yuan walked with a smile, and suddenly reached out and opened the door of a room on the side. Strangely, in this enclosed underground space, there was a slight airflow passing through, brushing past people's faces. The breeze blew out from the empty room, and correspondingly, there was inexplicably distorted light. "Nice watch, lend it to me." Luo Yuan politely took a valuable watch from Detective Hua Dian, and then threw it into the room. Under the distorted light, the watch disappeared without a trace. Sure enough, the work of the Toyama auction house is quite rough. It is said that in this room, when 2 people were dismantling, they played with time travel. One person safely returned to the ground, but his spine was twisted, and the other person has not been found until now. Hua Dian felt his wrist was sore and painful, and he subconsciously took half a step back. Luo Yuan closed the door. Well, the third rule: everyone must pray devoutly at all times. Due to the lack of anchoring equipment, there may be similar rooms and areas appearing. When that time comes, everyone can only rely on luck and hope that they don't travel into the sandstorm. Of course, if you can find a large fragment there that can accommodate you and survive, then you will be a lucky person who only appears once in a few decades. That's it. Most people had complicated expressions on their faces. Luck, that's not a good word. Fat Dragon followed the will of the true God and slowly said, but this is the value of Luo Yuandao's laboratory. The endless dust and debris outside is the greatest treasure. But if you don't master the skill to reassemble the fragments, you can only rely on luck. That's basically it. So you guys made that plan to treat us to a meal to let the only child in the world who has materialized formatting theory and proposed configuration theory help you solve the problem of luck. Luo Yuan was still smiling. Don't blame me for being picky, true God. First of all, formatting theory isn't some lost secret manual. You can give me a few of your church's believers now, and I can let you see the results in a month. Of course, after a period of time, I can't guarantee how many people will survive. Secondly, configuration theory isn't the patent of that child. The Apocalypse Laboratory and the Deep Blue Laboratory have even more mature industrialized technology, but they are biased towards physical products and are not related to the high-end needs of the laboratory that involves the structure of space and time. In fact, there is no evidence that the child has this kind of ability. The theoretical technology he has displayed is still limited to the spiritual side or the soul. It's just that the person who proposed the plan and I, the consultant, are all loyal supporters of the bloodline theory. So many people want to see if the kid who inherited Bo Qingwen's bloodline has talent in this area. At the end of the day, this is more like a prayer ceremony before trying your luck. At least that's what I understand. Driven by the true God's will, Fat Dragon's chest shook and he laughed softly. At this moment, someone in the crowd suddenly raised his hand. The one who did this was the centaur. He raised his only left hand and attracted everyone's attention. Under the gazes of the two groups of extraordinaries, he spoke in a hoarse voice. Mr. Luo Yuan, according to my understanding, you should be the luckiest of all the laboratory employees. If, as you said, you don't have the corresponding splicing technology, then you were even luckier to find a fragment with an astonishing volume? How did you move it and use it? Or is it still here in the depths of this sandstorm? The already narrow left pincer corridor seemed to be about to explode from the centaur's wanton disclosure. Those who knew and those who didn't subconsciously held their breaths as their brains worked quickly. They wanted to see how Luo Yuan would answer and react. The true God who possessed Fat Dragon could have stopped the centaur with a shout, but he didn't. Luo Yuan stared at the centaur, and the smile on his face that revealed the muscles on his cheeks deepened. But in the end he said in an extremely calm tone, "That's a private deal between me and the goddess of destiny. It's not suitable to say it face to face." A hoarse laugh came from the centaur's throat. He didn't continue to ask and just made an evaluation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.